Sandor Clegane, called the Hound, had spent much of his life haunted by fires, literal and metaphorical. He had once believed in nothing and no one, not even the brother who had burned him nor the kings and lords he had served. All of it meant less than the smallest coin to him, for he had learned too early in life that trusting anyone only brought more pain. And yet the world had a peculiar way of refusing to bend to his cynicism. In the wake of wars and broken kings, frozen nights and endless treacheries, he found himself at the wall, that towering stretch of ancient ice standing sentinel between the 7 kingdoms and the nightmares beyond. No one could have expected that he, of all men, might stay. But he did, and in the staying, found something he had never looked for, a purpose. He arrived at Castle Black on the back of a borrowed horse whose ribs jutted from its skin, proof that the journey north had not been kind. The wall loomed above him like a frozen wave in the grip of winter. Men in black shuffled across the yard, eyes hollowed by cold and exhaustion. Even the wind had teeth here, it cut through wool and leather, bit into bone and spirit alike. Sandor rode through the gate with little fanfare. Stripped of armor and wearing only a plain tunic beneath his black cloak, the Hound was nearly unrecognizable to the few who had once seen him in the service of House Lannister. They might have known of the burn scars that marred half his face, but there were far too many new scars across his body now, each telling a story of near-death and faint salvation. He did not speak more than he had to in those early days. He accepted the cots they gave him, ate the meager fare they offered, and answered questions only when pressed. The new recruits and veterans alike shot him uncertain glances. Some whispered that he was a deserter from half a dozen armies, a broken dog seeking shelter in the kennel of the Night's Watch because no lord would have him. Others remembered stories from the War of the 5 Kings, rumors that the Hound had once kidnapped a highborn girl, that he was a savage killer without mercy. Sandor didn't bother to refute any of it. True, false, it made no difference to him. At least here, in this frigid realm where breath turned to frost and men's hearts were tested by ice, he could find a kind of silence he had never known. Life was pared down to the essentials. You labored, you froze, you fought, you ate, and if you were lucky, you woke up and did it all again the next morning. In time, he took the black, though he hardly cared for ceremony. When asked for the words of his vow, he grumbled them out quiet, halting. But he said them in earnest. Some part of him, a part that had not been beaten or burned out of him, believed in the duty of the Night's Watch. Here was an oath that demanded no fealty to kings or lords or houses. Here was a duty to defend a realm, an entire people, from threats they scarcely imagined. He might have been surly about it, scowling through the vow with impatience. But he took it, and for the first time in his life, he gave himself to something more than his own survival. In those early months, Sandor discovered that life at the wall was grimmer than the stories. The portions of food they were allotted grew ever smaller as winter tightened its grip. The watchmen took shifts on top of the wall, their silhouettes dark against the endless white. Grotesque winds scoured men's faces so raw that they could barely speak by the time their watch ended. Many recruits had the spark of youth and grand stories in their hearts, but the winter nights drained that spark from them, leaving only resignation. Yet Sandor endured, whatever hardships came. Frost-bitten cheeks, raw lungs from the icy air, the biting pangs of hunger. None of it was worse than burning. None of it was worse than living under the shadow of his monstrous brother, or kneeling to a boy king he despised. At least here, the rules were clear. Work together or die alone, that was the unspoken creed. There were no illusions about honor or glory. The only illusions that remained were the Southern Lord's doubts that anything truly dangerous lurked beyond the wall. But Sandor had learned otherwise from rumors and from the eyes of the wildlings he met. He believed in the threat that lurked in the north, that had once been known to all as the White Walkers and the Army of the Dead. He had not seen them himself, but he trusted the conviction in others' eyes. Something was out there, waiting, and that, more than any oath or tradition, kept the Hound in Castle Black. As the moon after his arrival faded into the next, the watch recognized his competence. He was no green recruit, he was a veteran fighter, quick with a sword, unflinching in close-quarters combat. Where younger men froze at the sight of a snarling wildling or a white, Sandor's anger flared hot. When the time came for him to prove himself, it came abruptly and without ceremony. A small group of wildlings had been caught scaling the wall in a patch of darkness. Sandor led the charge without being asked. He fought silently, driving them off with brutal efficiency. Within a minute, 3 lay dead in the snow, and the survivors retreated. The black brothers who witnessed it did not cheer or clap. They only nodded, offered him a grunt of acknowledgement. That was the closest thing to respect found up here, and it was a language he spoke fluently. Soon enough, he was put in charge of training new recruits. It was the last job he thought he'd ever hold, teaching boys hardly old enough to bear a sword how to keep their wits about them. But he did it with all the grim dedication that had kept him alive this long. He hollered at them, insulted their forms, smacked the back of their heads when they forgot a step. But he also shielded them from the scorn of senior men when they showed improvement. Young ones like Daniel, a stable boy from the Westerlands, or Marek, a Sellsword's bastard from the Stormlands, found in Sandor a teacher who actually taught. They expected him to be cruel, to bark commands without explanation. Instead, he corrected their stances and forced them to practice them again and again until their muscles ached. Some nights, he'd toss each boy a half-rusted sword and say, "You want to live through a winter up here? Then fight me and don't you dare cry about bruises." Within weeks, fresh recruits were handling themselves better than some veterans remembered. Word spread. "He's got the grit of 5 men," the senior rangers said of him, "and he's made of steel that won." Over time, the Lord Commander began calling on him for advice, whether about raiding parties beyond the wall or the discipline of the yard. Sandor, for his part, never sought the attention. He had never wanted to be a leader. Leadership was what got men killed by other men's stupidity. He merely wanted to do his job, fight if needed, train if told. Perhaps there was even some part of him that was beginning to find a shred of belonging, as odd as that was for him to admit. Death and danger were always near. The rumors were true about the others who could raise the dead, though they had not yet appeared in force. There were fleeting sightings. Rangers returned pale and shaking. Some did not return at all. The wildlings who slipped over the wall came with stories of empty villages and bodies that rose in the night to kill. But still the Night's Watch was stretched thin. The power in King's Landing was fickle in its support. Some lords believed the threat was over and done, while others were more caught up in their own politics. Only a handful of new volunteers and criminals forced to choose between the rope or the wall trickled north. It was never enough. Each day, the men braced for an onslaught that might come in the next hour or might never come at all. When the old Lord Commander, tired and burdened by the losses and the weight of leadership, took ill, the question arose of who would succeed him. Rumors spread. Some said a ranger named Borand would be chosen. Others whispered the name of Serdurin, an anointed knight from a minor house, more well-spoken and well-born. The notion that Sandor might become Lord Commander didn't cross many minds, least of all Sandor's own. But the ravages of winter and the times demanded a certain type of leader, not necessarily the best speaker or the highest born. The Night's Watch needed a commander who could face monsters without flinching and who could instill the same courage in others. So it happened that when the old Lord Commander died coughing out blood in the middle of the night, it fell upon the officers, first ranger, master-at-arms, stewards, and builders to elect a new one. Sandor thought it a fool's errand. He barely listened when the master-at-arms cornered him in the yard the next day, talking about the need for strong leadership and an unyielding hand. Sandor spat. "Go find another who wants it. I don't." But the old crow only smiled in that tight way men do when they have no good news to give. "We've all seen your skill," he said softly. "We know your temper, your cunning. You're the sort of man who won't shy away from any fight, even the one that's coming." Sandor scowled, gave a laugh that was more of a snarl, and went back to overseeing the recruits. He thought little more of it until that night, when the matter was brought up among the senior black brothers. They said every man had the right to speak his piece before the vote. Sandor hung back, leaning against a stone pillar in the common hall, listening to the speeches. Borand pledged to improve discipline among the men if he were chosen. Serdurin droned on about upholding the Watch's oldest traditions, citing the ancient vows and codes. A few others said their bits, either too shy or too eager, but none who truly sparked the sense of grim necessity the Watch so badly needed. Sandor said nothing. He didn't even volunteer his name. Then, in a hush that fell across the hall, the Master-at-Arms spoke. "Brothers, I name Sandor Clegane for Lord Commander." More than a few men gasped or muttered in confusion. Was this a jest? But a hush fell again. For all his curses and rough edges, they knew who he was, knew what he could do. Borand tried to protest. but was silenced by a few barked words from the scarred rangers who had fought beside the Hound on a cold night against wildling raiders. Ser Durin swelled with indignation. What authority had this once dog of the Lannisters to lead them? But more and more voices rose in Clegane's favor. They cited his fearlessness and skill, the loyalty he had shown when standing shoulder to shoulder with the Watch, the discipline that flourished under his training. Sandor could only watch, silent at first. A frown etched across the burned side of his face. When asked to speak, he let out a bitter chuckle. "You want me as Lord Commander?" he growled. "I'll tell you, if you put me in charge, I'm not going to coddle you. I won't be kissing the boots of any southern lord, or giving fancy words to any boy king. We're up here to keep out what's lurking in the north. If you think you can't stomach what I do or how I do it, then vote for someone else. That's all I have to say." It was hardly a stirring speech, yet it lit something in the men. Here was someone who wouldn't play games. Someone who had no illusions about fine armor or glorious battle. He cared about one thing: survival, and through survival, fulfilling the only oath that ever mattered in the savage cold. So the vote was held, each officer dropping tokens into a battered old helm. When it was done, Sandor Clegane had the majority. The realm beyond the wall seemed to hold its breath at that moment, as if it recognized the Hound's reluctant rise. The Black Brothers saluted him, or as near to a salute as they could muster, with nods and murmurs of "Aye, Lord Commander." The old Master-at-Arms placed a single black cloak around Sandor's shoulders, a purely symbolic gesture, as Sandor was already in black, but it had weight nonetheless. He felt none of the triumph or warmth a man might feel upon winning a victory. Instead, he felt a dull heaviness in his chest. He had never sought command or glory or anything like it. But if this was what had to be done, he would do it. Because someone had to do it. Because the world was teetering on an edge again, and the wall needed someone savage enough to hold it. Thus began Sandor Clegane's tenure as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, a job he accepted through no desire of his own but with the iron will that had pulled him through all his battles. The men wondered if he'd prove a tyrant or a savior. Sandor himself wondered how long it would be before the next great threat hammered on the gates. He expected no thanks, no praise, no easy victories. He only expected the fight. And so, in the hush of that snowy night, with torches flickering against the soot-stained walls, the Hound became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He found himself standing at the top of the wall the next morning, while cloak billowing behind him, gazing out over the vast white wilderness. His scarred face was set in grim determination. Somewhere out there, he imagined, the others might be stirring, or wildlings might be gathering in savage pockets. The cold wind stung the raw skin around his scars, but he didn't flinch from it. He remembered how often he had run from the flame, how the fire had once been the shape of all his fears. But now, in this land of ice and ghosts, he had found something that could freeze a man's soul. For once in his life, he would not run. He would stand, sword in hand, ready to do the only thing he'd ever truly been good at: fight. That was the first step toward forging a new legend along the wall, one that would turn the Hound from a servant of death into a defender of life, in the only way he knew how. Sandor Clegane stood atop the wall, the biting wind cutting through wool and leather as if neither existed. Staring out at the vast white expanse, he told himself he had been a fool to let these men name him Lord Commander. He wanted no illusions. He had no gift for speeches, no taste for politics. And yet, in the days after his election, a hard sense of duty settled on him, heavier than any armor. He knew war when he saw it coming, and he saw it in the gloom beyond the ice. The others were out there somewhere, or if not the others, then the wildlings who still lurked in restless bands. Both would spill blood if given the chance. He had taken his rest in the small, cramped chamber that once belonged to the Lord Commander who had come before him. A mean bed, a single table stacked with old ledgers, and a soot-streaked brazier, those were the humble trappings of command here at Castle Black. He had slept with a knife under his pillow out of habit, trusting no one, for trust was a commodity that had long since burned away from his life. In the morning, he rose before first light to an ache in his bones that reminded him of old wounds. He tugged on his black cloak, thinking that if any color were to define him, it might as well be the darkness of night. At least it did not lie about what it was. He found the men in the yard waiting for orders, huddling against the cold with hands stuffed under armpits. Some stamped their feet on the packed snow. Others pulled their cloaks tight, grateful that this morning was not as merciless as some had been. At the sight of him, they came to a semblance of attention. Not quite disciplined ranks, he did not expect that yet, but at least they showed a spark of respect. Perhaps it was fear. He gazed at their faces, young and old, a few lined with wrinkles etched by a lifetime of wind and cold, some still smooth with youth. Many had the worn look of men who had seen too many mornings and too little food. Behind them, the wall loomed, a pale fortress of ice. Beside them, the towers and halls of Castle Black, half in ruin in places, stood as a testament to the unkind seasons of the past years. He cut to the core of the matter. "We have work to do," he told them without ceremony. "We can't rely on the South to send us men or steel or grain. If we want to hold this damned wall, we have to see to our own. Some of you will join the Rangers on patrol. Others will keep the fires in the armory burning day and night, forging weapons. We'll need more arrowheads, more swords if we can manage, more spears. And we'll need to repair the hoists and pulleys for the next time a band of wildlings tries to climb at night." They listened, some with arms crossed, some with eyes flicking nervously to the horizon. He thought he glimpsed acceptance in their faces, a readiness to follow. After the roll was called, men trickled off to their tasks. A few lingered by him, uncertain if they should speak or not. One was a lanky recruit named Podrick, though not the well-known Podrick who once served a southern knight. This Podrick was from a port town in the Vale and had come north with a group of thieves who were offered the choice between the noose and the watch. He had chosen the watch. The boy's voice shook. "Lord Commander, I wanted to ask about the rumors. They say some rangers found footprints in the forest that didn't seem right. Marks of someone walking barefoot in the snow. And there were dead crows in a circle. Could it be them?" Sandor's jaw tensed. He didn't believe in terrifying his men with half-heard whispers, but he would not lie either. "It could be," he allowed, voice gruff, "or it could be a trick of the snow. We won't know until we see for ourselves. Don't fret over it until there's blood to prove it." The boy gulped, nodded, and headed toward the armory. Sandor watched him go. Truth be told, he hated dealing with men's fears. He had spent so much of his life swallowing his own terror, of fire, of betrayal, of the next day's uncertain promise, that hearing it from others only fed his impatience. And yet he understood that if his men could not voice their worries, the dread would fester like an unclean wound. So he would listen, if only to ensure they did not crumble when the moment of truth arrived. Within a fortnight, he settled into his new role with a grim determination. He woke at dawn, oversaw drills in the yard, met with the stewards to see what supplies they could scrap together, and listened to reports from the rangers who returned from patrol. He assigned schedules for the watch atop the wall, rotating men to ensure none were left in that freezing wind too long. He pushed the fortress to function like a war machine because that was exactly what it needed to be. For all that, he found little rest. Each night, he lay on the small bed with the knife under his pillow, his mind still humming with concerns about the next day. The wind howled outside his window, as if mocking the notion of peace. Winter's grip tightened. The nights lengthened, swallowing daylight in increments so small one barely noticed until it was supper time and already black as pitch. The cold found new ways to gnaw at a man's body. A creeping numbness that started in the fingertips and toes and spread inward. Frost laced the ends of beards, eyelashes froze shut at times, and the wall itself glistened like an enormous glass blade standing against the sky. The men of the night's watch had no illusions about comfort. They clung to meager fires, shared body heat in cramped barracks, and occasionally cursed their ill fate. But under Sandor's leadership, they also had more direction than they had possessed in months. The threat was out there, and he reminded them of it daily. He gathered what rangers he could spare and ventured into the haunted forest that sprawled beyond the wall. It was an act of necessity. You did not defend a fortress by cowering behind it. You ventured forth, took stock of the land, scouted for foes, and set traps if need be. He brought 10 men with him, including a grizzled ranger named Garrick who had survived 3 winters on the wall, and young Marek, the Sellsword's bastard who had proven himself in combat once before. Together, they descended the great wooden stairs that clung to the side of the ice. Their breath swirled before them in frigid clouds, their cloaks snapping in the wind. Once beyond the wall, the world seemed even quieter, as if muffled by centuries of snow and tree. Black branches clawed at the sky, and the ground crunched underfoot. No birds sang, no animals chattered. A sense of dread seemed to hang in the air, something old and watchful. They pressed on, alert for any sign of movement. Sandor felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle at every snap of a twig. Fires never ceased to haunt him, but this was a different kind of fear. This was the knowledge that they were a small band in a vast wilderness, and if something truly monstrous lurked among the trees, they might not see it until it was too late. Even so, he kept his sword loose in its scabbard, ready to be drawn in a heartbeat. They found tracks on the second day, some from wild elk or wolves, others that might have belonged to men. Garrick knelt over a set of footprints in a snowdrift, frowning. "Barefoot," he murmured, "or something close to it. But the prints aren't quite human. Look here at the shape of the toes. Could be a trick of the snow, I suppose." Sandor stared at the prints, felt a coldness that went deeper than the wind. He recalled the stories told in hushed tones of whites wandering the night, footprints that half froze in the moment they were made. He had never faced one himself, but he had seen men who had. The memory of their hollowed eyes unsettled him more than he liked to admit. He rose. "Spread out, but stay within earshot," he said, his voice echoing softly in the stillness. "If you see anything that moves, call out." They combed the area, scanning the underbrush and the skeletal remains of old trees. The day seemed stuck in twilight, the clouds overhead thick with the promise of more snow. Now and then they glimpsed a flash of movement. A bird? A fox? Impossible to tell. Nerves set them all on edge, even Sandor. But they saw no sign of foes beyond those odd footprints. No wildlings emerged from behind a trunk. No silent shapes in the distance. By evening, they made camp, building a small, smokeless fire in a hollow beneath a leaning pine. Sandor insisted on double watches, not trusting the gloom. As he sat by the weak flames, the dancing light reminded him of the time his brother had held his face to the brazier. That memory never left him, a scorching brand that marked not only his flesh but his soul. Tonight, the flames were small and weak, nothing like the roaring fire that scarred him. He watched them with something like defiance, forcing his eyes to stay on the flickering orange embers as if to prove he would not look away. The men said little. They were too cold, too wary, each lost in his own silent prayers. At dawn, they packed up and continued their search, pushing deeper into the forest. The hush remained oppressive. By midday, they stumbled upon something that drew them up short. A ring of stones, blackened as if by some ancient fire, the center filled with bones. Not human bones. Sandor thought them to be animal, perhaps deer or goat. The bones were picked clean and arranged in a spiral pattern. Garrick cursed under his breath, crossing himself in an old Northman's gesture of warding. Sandor felt a deep unease. He had seen his share of battlefields, but this was different. This was ritual or perhaps madness. He bent down, picked up a charred fragment of bone, and let it fall. Whichever men did this, they're cracked. If it was men, he said, we head back. Keep watch. I don't like this place. They left the macabre site behind, hearts pounding. On the return journey, the wind picked up, rustling the branches overhead. Each sound seemed magnified, and the men jumped at shadows. But nothing attacked, and no new footprints revealed themselves. When at last they emerged from the tree line and caught sight of the wall's colossal face of ice, more than one man breathed a sigh of relief. Sandor, for his part, felt no relief, only a heavier sense of foreboding. They had found signs of something unnatural, but it lurked just out of sight, leaving them to guess and fear. Back at Castle Black, he called a meeting of his senior officers in the drafty chamber that served as a common hall. Torches sputtered on the walls, casting jagged shadows on the rough wooden tables. Garrick described the footprints, and another ranger, Orland, told of odd sightings near Eastwatch. Flickers of blue light in the distance, as if some spectral presence wandered the shoreline. There were no confirmed sightings of white walkers or whites, but the tension in the room was palpable. They all knew the ancient stories, how the others crept out of legend under cover of the longest night. Sandor leaned forward, hands curled into fists on the table. We cannot wait for proof in the form of corpses. We have to prepare for the worst. Double the ranger patrols along the wall. Make certain each outpost is stocked with dragonglass, if we have any left, or steel that's been forged with what we can muster. I want watchers with bows day and night. They listened. Some, like Ser Durin, who had been a contender for Lord Commander, looked less than pleased to take orders from a man they viewed as unschooled in courtesy. But none challenged him outright, because the danger was too real now, or maybe because they sensed that Sandor's resolve was a bulwark. The Hound was not a man who inspired love, but he did inspire a kind of fearful respect. And so the meeting dispersed with nods and mutterings of "Yes, Lord Commander," and at once. In private, though, Sandor seethed with impatience. Their numbers were too few, their supplies too meager, and the southern lords offered them little help, some because they doubted the threat, others because they had their own wars to fight. If the others came in force, the wall might hold for a time, but Castle Black would be only the first line of many to fall, and no man, woman, or child in the realm would be safe. That fact kept him awake into the small hours of the night. Amid these new duties, he also dealt with the daily troubles that plagued the watch, men squabbling over rations, rumors of a steward stealing from the stores, a blacksmith's apprentice whose hands shook too badly in the cold to properly shape metal. There was no glory in these tasks, no epic ballad waiting to be sung. But if he neglected them, the watch would crumble from within before the real enemy even arrived. He had begun to realize that leading men demanded more than simply fighting beside them. It meant solving their disputes, ensuring they slept with full bellies, giving them a reason to get up each morning despite the cold that froze the marrow in their bones. He cursed the old Lord Commander at times for dying and leaving him to this burden, then spat for good measure. The Lord Commander's ghost gave no reply. Over the next few weeks, Sandor systematically pushed the men to fortify the castle as best they could. They repaired the gates, propped up sagging walls, hammered iron spikes at strategic points along the ramparts. He ordered them to lay in more fuel for fires, everything from logs to scraps of peat from the bogs near the Shadow Tower. If the time came to face whites, he wanted flames enough to greet them. None of this was easy. The men were tired, the cold unrelenting, and supplies scarce. Yet he drove them on with the same relentless spirit that had fueled him on battlefields. When they grumbled, he snapped, "Better you curse me now than your own graves later." A grim sort of camaraderie formed under his leadership. Though they might fear him, they also recognized that the Hound did not sit idly in a warm chamber while they toiled. He was out there, patrolling in the night, hefting lumber, showing them the stance to use with a spear when their fingers were too numb to hold it. Sometimes the memory of the war in the south came back to him in flashes. He recalled the boy King Joffrey, the madness of King's Landing, the sound of steel on steel in the streets. He remembered the time he carried Sansa Stark from danger in his own clumsy attempt at kindness. He thought of Arya Stark and her fierce eyes. The notion that he might have some measure of redemption now by protecting all the realms of men from a greater threat was one he pushed aside. He did not like to think of himself as a savior. But on cold nights, when he lay awake in the flickering torchlight of his chamber, he wondered if perhaps this was fate's twisted humor, giving him a chance to guard the living after so many years as a killer. One evening, as he was finishing a patrol on the wall's top, he spotted two distant figures approaching from the north. At first, he couldn't believe his eyes, who in their right mind would be traveling alone out there. He signaled the watchers to ready themselves. Then, as the figures drew closer, the watchers realized these were wildlings, perhaps deserters from a larger group. The portcullis at the base of the wall was lowered, crossbows trained. But the wildlings came unarmed, hands raised in surrender. One was a woman with ice-crusted hair and a desperate look in her eyes. The other was a young boy, so bundled in furs that only his terrified face showed. Sandor descended with a small escort to meet them. They were half-frozen, and it was clear they had come in peace. The woman spoke in broken common tongue, explaining that they had fled a camp of their own people further north. She told a harrowing tale of something that killed indiscriminately in the night, rotten corpses that moved as swiftly as living men, eyes gleaming blue in the darkness. The wildling leader had tried to rally a defense, but too many had fallen. In the chaos, she had taken her child and run. She collapsed in the snow, crying, the boy clinging to her. The men of the watch hovered uneasily, uncertain whether to believe or pity them. Sandor crouched and lifted the woman's chin, staring into her eyes. He saw genuine terror there, and for the first time, he felt a pang that resembled empathy. He stood and waved for a steward. "Get them inside," he ordered. "Warm them up, give them some food." As they were led away, Garrick muttered at his side, "We can't feed every wildling who wanders up to the gate, Lord Commander. Our supplies are stretched thin as it is." Sandor scowled. "I'm not giving them a feast, but I'm not letting them die in front of us. If it's whites they're fleeing, we do well to hear what they know." And so the wildling woman was questioned. Her name was Runa, and she was gaunt with hunger. Between gulps of weak soup, she told them that a group of whites had appeared near their encampment 2 weeks prior. At first, it was only a few. They cut them down and burned the remains, remembering what the free folk had learned during the last great battles. But every night more came. Soon, the camp was overrun. She had seen a giant among them, an actual giant, once living, now dead, stomping through the snow with half its flesh hanging off its bones. Only a handful of wildlings escaped. She knew not where the others had gone, but suspected them all dead. Sandor listened, his face set like carved stone. Around the table, the other officers of the watch exchanged uneasy glances. "So it's begun again," said one of the stewards. "The dead are on the move." Sandor rapped his knuckles on the table. "We're not cowering behind the wall waiting for them to come to us." He looked to Garrick, Orland, and the others. "Gather a scouting party of our best rangers, no more than 15. We'll go out there and see what's truly happening. If it's as bad as she says, we'll find a way to slow them down. Or kill them if we can." He felt the weight of those words. Kill them if we can. He knew from the stories that steel alone might not suffice. Fire, dragon glass, Valyrian steel, those were the rumored weapons that could end White Walkers and their whites. They had precious little of any of them, but they did have flame. They would bring torches, oil, anything that could burn. The next day, they set out. 15 men on horseback, each with a sword or axe at his side, a torch strapped to his saddle, and a small cache of dragonglass daggers or arrowheads if they had them. They rode north, beyond the forest, into a broken landscape of ice and rock. Runa insisted on coming with them. She wanted to see if any of her people still lived. Sandor allowed it, knowing she might help them navigate or read the signs of the wild. The cold was merciless, but the sky was clear, a pale blue that offered little warmth. Their horses snorted, breath pluming. Every so often, Sandor would scan the horizon for movement. He saw nothing except the quiet sprawl of the land. They rode through a barren pass between low hills. Snowdrifts rose in sweeping arcs, concealing who knew what beneath. Garrick rode beside him, face grim. "No sign yet," he said in a low voice. "Keep looking," Sandor replied. "And keep your hand near your sword." They pressed on for hours, stopping only briefly to water the horses and let them feed on the patchy tufts of grass poking through the snow. The wind picked up in the afternoon, blowing gusts that whistled across the open ground. Runa, wrapped in furs behind one of the rangers, tapped Sandor's shoulder and pointed east. "Camp was that way," she said, her accent thick. He nodded, turning his horse in that direction. The other men followed. The hills gave way to a wide, flat basin. As they crested a small rise, they spotted a cluster of low huts and tents, half-collapsed, scattered on a plain of white. Runa's breath caught in her throat. "That's it," she whispered. Sandor raised a hand for the group to slow. They approached cautiously, fanning out in a defensive arc. No smoke rose from the huts, no sign of life stirred. The place had the quiet of a graveyard. The stench of death reached them before they even dismounted, foul and thick, like meat left too long in the sun. One of the younger rangers gagged. Sandor's grip on his horse's reins tightened, memories of rotting corpses from past battlefields flooding his mind. They left the horses in a rough circle, men with crossbows standing guard. Sandor led the others on foot into the ruins of the camp. Bodies lay strewn about, some half buried in snow, others leaning against collapsed walls. Most were wildlings, men, women, even a few children, eyes frozen open in horror. All were slashed or torn, many missing limbs. The stench was overpowering. Flies would have swarmed in warmer climes, but here, the freeze had kept the decay slow. Garrick knelt beside one corpse, lifting an arm. The body was stiff as a board. "Dead a while," he said softly. Runa trembled, tears in her eyes. "My sister's family, somewhere here," she murmured, stumbling from one body to the next, checking faces, sobbing. Sandor walked through the camp, scanning for any sign that the whites still lurked. He saw footprints, too many to distinguish. Some pointed outward as though an entire horde had marched away. "If they came here and slaughtered them," he said to Garrick, "where are the whites now?" "Gone, it seems," Garrick replied. "The others must have moved on. Or the whites went wandering. Hard to say." Sandor's eyes fell on one grotesque sight, the massive corpse of a giant slumped against a broken cart, half its face missing, one eye hanging out. He drew closer. The giant's chest was riddled with arrow wounds, blackened with old blood. A battered club lay nearby, splintered at the handle. Around the giant's neck hung what looked like a net of bones. Sandor exhaled sharply. To face such a thing in life would be daunting enough. To face it as an undead abomination was a nightmare he could scarcely imagine. Runa's sharp cry drew his attention. She stood by a ruin of a tent, tears freezing on her cheeks. "They're all dead," she choked out. One of the younger rangers gently tried to lead her away from the sight of a small body with an arrow in its back. She resisted at first, then collapsed against him, sobbing. Sandor averted his gaze, jaw set. He wasn't a stranger to the tragedy of war, but the sight of a child's corpse always struck him in a way he couldn't name, an echo of all the innocence he never had. They searched the camp, hoping against hope to find a survivor. There were none. Not even a dog still alive. Death had claimed this place. The only silver lining was that the whites were long gone, though that also meant they might be anywhere by now. By late afternoon, the search concluded. The men were shaken, most had never seen such devastation wrought by the undead. Garrick approached Sandor, gazing up at the dimming sky. Sun's going down soon. We should burn the bodies before nightfall, or else they may rise. Sandor nodded. Do it. Gather them up. Use what wood and oil we have. It was a grim task, piling the corpses in heaps, including the giant, soaking them in oil. Runa found her sister among the dead and wailed over the body, but knew that the only kindness left was fire. By the time the torches were lit and the flames roared skyward, darkness had begun to settle. The crackling pyres illuminated the horrors of the camp in flickering orange. Smoke billowed, thick and pungent. Some of the men turned away, tears in their eyes, though none would admit it. Sandor stood before the flames, trying not to look too closely at the shapes that writhed in the heat. The memory of his own scarring threatened to surge up, but he forced it down, gritting his teeth. It was not about him now. It was about ensuring these poor souls did not rise again to torment the living. He forced himself to watch the fire, to accept its necessity, to let the heat wash over him as a safeguard rather than an instrument of pain. They camped on the edge of the wildling settlement, setting watches throughout the night. None of them slept easily. A few men had nightmares, waking with startled cries. Runa sat by the dying embers of the funeral pyres, her face wet with silent grief. Sandor couldn't bring himself to comfort her, he had no words for that. But he did drape an extra cloak around her shoulders, an awkward kindness. She nodded mutely in thanks. In the morning, with the bodies reduced to ash, they mounted up and rode back to Castle Black. The journey was tense, each swirl of snow or creak of ice potentially hiding a threat. But the dead seemed to have moved on. Perhaps the others led them to some new horror deeper in the north. Sandor was not fool enough to think that meant safety. It only meant the next blow had yet to fall. Upon their return, the men were silent. Rumors spread quickly through the castle of the slaughter they had witnessed. The younger recruits paled at the descriptions. Some whispered fears that all the wildlings who had once lived north of the wall would return now as whites. The prospect of an undead army weighed on everyone's spirits. Food tasted of ash, and the cold felt sharper against the skin. Sandor convened his officers again. This time, Ser Dern spoke up, uneasy. We should send word to the lords south of us, beg for reinforcements. If the others are truly stirring, they must come to the defense of the wall. Sandor snorted. Aye, we can send ravens. But I won't hold my breath waiting for help. They have their own concerns down there, always do. If they send a token force, it'll be some collection of criminals and third sons. If we get anything at all. Ser Dern bristled, but knew better than to argue. The truth was that the southern kingdoms had never held the Night's Watch in the highest esteem, seeing it as a place for exiles and misfits. They might heed the call if convinced of the severity of the threat, but even then, who would lead that force? Which lord? The realm was fractured. Though the War of the Five Kings had ended in some sense, the scars remained. All the same, we must try, Garrick said. We need men and we need supplies. Food, weapons, dragaglass if any is left. Without them, we'll be fighting shadows with broomsticks. Sandor grunted. Send the ravens then. But let's not be fools. We'll rely on ourselves first. Keep training. Keep patrolling. Keep the fires ready. So the ravens were dispatched, bearing urgent messages to every corner of Westeros. The dead rise again. We have seen them. The Great War is not ended. Lend us your strength, or the living may fall. Sandor read the letter himself before it was sent, spitting at the formality of the words. Still, if it moved even a handful of lords to send help, it might be worth it. In the following weeks, the castle hunkered down. Snow fell constantly, piling high against the walls, drifting into every crevice. Men labored to clear pathways, to keep the main courtyard usable. The nights were so cold that frost formed inside windows. Yet there was a renewed sense of purpose. Everyone understood, now more than ever, that they were the last shield against a tidal wave of death. Complaints about chores were fewer, even the laziest man found his sense of duty. Sandor's presence, grim and towering, reminded them that they had no time for self-pity. Occasional wildling stragglers came to the gate. Some were turned away if they looked like threats, but most were allowed in, provided they surrendered their weapons. Sandor was no friend to wildlings, he had killed enough of them in skirmishes, but the old lines were blurring. The true enemy did not care about the squabbles between free folk and kneelers. The true enemy wanted them all dead and resurrected as puppets of ice. So the gates opened and men and women who once hated the Night's Watch now clung to it for survival. One such newcomer was a wildling raider known as Hara Three Toes, rumored to have cannibalized his enemies. He arrived with just a spear and a nasty scar along his scalp. The men eyed him warily, half expecting him to try to kill them in their sleep. But Hara only asked for a chance to fight the dead. "If the others come for us all, I might as well face them on the wall," he said gruffly. Sandor looked him up and down. The man was built like a tree trunk, with arms knotted by muscle and had 2 toes missing on 1 foot. "Fine," Sandor said. "But you cause any trouble, I'll feed you to the crows alive." "Understood." Hara nodded. Runa stayed, too, though she offered no help at first. She was wrapped in grief, silent and hollow-eyed. But eventually, at Sandor's urging, she began helping in the kitchens, stirring pots of thin stew for the men. The fortress had turned into a strange mix of black brothers, reformed criminals, and wildlings united by the threat of annihilation. Sandor towered over them all, barking orders, sometimes offering a curt nod of encouragement, but never letting them forget why they were here. Weeks passed, and eventually a raven returned. It bore a message from a minor northern lord, responding that times were hard, winter was cruel, but they would do what they could. No mention of men or supplies was made. A handful of other replies arrived in the days that followed, mostly lords expressing polite disbelief or regret. 1 or 2 said they might dispatch a small party in the spring, but for now the roads were impassable. Sandor read each letter with growing disgust. The realm was either too embroiled in its own problems or too foolish to accept the danger. Spring might be too late if it came at all. So the watch would stand alone as it always had. Sandor refused to let despair take root. He channeled his frustration into more training, more patrols, forging what blades they could. The blacksmith's forge glowed day and night, the ring of hammers echoing across the courtyard. In spare moments, Sandor himself helped shape the raw steel. He wasn't a trained smith, but he knew enough of weapons. The heat of the forge still made his heart pound. Fire was fire, after all, but he forced himself to endure it, sweat rolling down his burned cheek. Now and then he dreamed of the dead. In his dreams, they were at the gates, pale and unrelenting, with eyes of cold fire. He would snarl and swing his sword only to see them reform or be replaced by 100 more. Sometimes he thought he saw his brother among them, Gregor Clegane, towering and undead, with a grin of blue lips. Then he'd wake in a cold sweat, heart hammering like a war drum. But in the waking hours, he showed no fear, only determination. The men needed that. They couldn't follow a leader who cowered from nightmares. Then came the day when the horn blew 3 times, a sound that had once signaled White Walkers, though few living men had heard it used in truth. Sandor was at the archery butts showing a couple of recruits how to release a longbow properly. The sound froze every man in place. 2 blasts meant wildlings, 1 meant returning rangers, and 3 was the terror hidden in the hearts of the Night's Watch. He dropped the bow and sprinted, scarred face darkening with urgency. The men on the wall were pointing, shouting. He took the winding steps 2 at a time until he reached the top, chest heaving in the icy wind. His gaze swept the horizon. At first, he saw nothing but endless white. Then, in the far distance, he spotted movement. A line of figures, small as ants at this range, trudging through the snow toward the wall. More than one line, actually. A host. The wind stung his eyes, but he did not blink. He counted in his head. Impossible to be exact, but dozens, maybe hundreds of shapes, some large, some small. They moved with an unnerving slowness and unity. "What do you see?" gasped Garrick, coming up behind him. Sandor exhaled. "They're here." He beckoned Garrick over to the massive winch that controlled the gate and the elevator platforms. "Get the archers ready. Fill barrels with oil, get them heated. We'll drop fire from above. Spread the word. Every man on the wall or in the courtyard with a weapon at the ready. We hold them here." The men flew into action. Bells rang out echoing through the castle. The courtyard erupted in confusion, men stumbling out of barracks, hastily buckling on armor, fetching bows and spears. Stewards ran to the armory, dragging out barrels of pitch. The wildlings who had joined them stood grim-faced, muttering prayers to their gods. Runa was among them, hair snarled around her shoulders, though she clutched a small blade with trembling hands. The tension was a living thing, a coil wound so tight it threatened to snap at the slightest touch. Atop the wall, Sandor watched the approaching shapes. In the harsh light, he could now see a faint shimmer in the air around them, a swirl of ice and snow that accompanied their march. Some of the figures were indeed wights, little more than animated corpses. Others were larger, possibly undead giants. At the center loomed darker silhouettes, unnaturally tall and slender, moving with a grace that no corpse could match. The others. He tasted iron in his mouth, realized he'd bitten his tongue. Fire would be their best weapon. Dragonglass arrowheads might fell a few if they could hit them, but there were many. The advantage of the wall was immense. If they could keep the gates closed and pour destruction down upon them, perhaps they could hold out. Perhaps. He bellowed orders to the archers to space themselves out. Aim for the giants first, bring them down. And if you see something that looks like a white walker, he said, using the southern name for the others, shoot it with dragonglass if you can. Don't waste your time on whites with those arrows. Men nodded, swallowing hard. The first lines of whites drew closer, their ragged clothing fluttering in the wind, skin blackened by rot or frosted pale. Some had gaping wounds that would have felled any living creature, but these kept moving. Light the oil, Sandor roared. Below, on a narrow ledge carved into the wall, men set torches to the first barrels. The stench of burning pitch rose. Then the leading whites were within range. The archers let fly. Arrows whistled down, some shattering harmlessly against the ice below, others finding their marks in rotten flesh. A few whites toppled, pinned to the snow. But the mass pressed on, crawling over the fallen. Then, at Sandor's signal, the barrels were tipped. Fire cascaded down the face of the wall, splashing across the ground below in a wave of flame. Where it touched whites, they burst into shrieking infernos. Even from this height, the men could hear the unearthly wails. But the tide did not stop. More whites flowed in behind them, trampling the burning ones underfoot. The watchers on the wall cursed. Sandor's face was set in a snarl. Keep pouring it, he shouted. Don't let up. Barrel after barrel was hurled down. The ground at the base of the wall was soon a conflagration. Smoke billowed upward, making men cough. At first, it seemed the whites would break, but they kept coming, piling into the flames until the blaze flickered with countless burning corpses. Then one of the great shapes stomped forward, a giant in life, even bigger in death. It swung a massive club. The flames licked at its fur cloak, but it strode through the inferno like a creature possessed, batting aside the smoldering dead. The archers peppered it with arrows, some tipped with dragonglass, but the giant howled and kept coming. Its flesh was singed away in places, revealing bone. Yet it would not fall. Sandor clenched his jaw. Focus that thing. Bring it down. The men rained arrows upon it, but it was not enough. The giant slammed its club against the wall, causing a minor tremor. Chunks of ice fell from above. One man lost his footing and plummeted, screaming, into the flames below. And then, amidst the chaos, Sandor spotted them, tall figures striding through the inferno with an eerie calm. The White Walkers. Their weapons shimmered with a cold light, swords of ice that did not melt in the heat. Where they walked, the flames seemed to recede as if frightened. One raised its arm and a crackling storm of ice blasted upward. It struck one of the hoist mechanisms, freezing it solid, rendering it useless. Another raised its sword, pointing at the wall. Whites converged on that spot, clawing at the ice as if searching for a way through. Sandor's heart hammered. Archers on those walkers, he roared. A volley of dragonglass arrows arced downward. One white walker was forced to move, its graceful sidestep so swift it looked like a blur. Another arrow struck the second walker's arm but clattered away, leaving a crack in the icy armor that sealed almost instantly. The men cursed in disbelief. The walker lifted its sword again. The wind howled around them, swirling with tiny shards of ice that glittered in the firelight. Then it slashed the air. A wave of cold shot up the wall, freezing men where they stood if they didn't move fast enough. Garrick dove aside in time, but one unlucky ranger was caught in the blast, ice creeping up his legs, turning him into a statue. Sandor felt the cold grasp his feet for a moment, but he tore free, ice snapping around his boots. He bared his teeth. Catapults? Now. They had only a few small catapults normally used to lob flaming pitch. These had been prepared, loaded with pots of oil and kindling. On his command, the crew launched them downward. The pots crashed among the whites, splattering fire across a wide arc. For an instant, the White Walker at the center of the horde was engulfed. The men cheered, but their cheers died in their throats when the figure emerged from the flames, cloaked in steam and fury. Its sword glowed with an otherworldly sheen. Below, the whites kept hurling themselves at the wall, almost stacking atop each other in their frenzy. The giant hammered again, carving out chunks of ice. Sandor realized with horror that they might actually begin to break through if they kept this up indefinitely. The wall was huge, but the whites didn't tire or feel fear. They would chip away at it until a passage formed. He grabbed Garrick by the shoulder. We need more firepower on the giant and those walkers or we're finished. Tell the men to prepare for a sortie if necessary. We might have to fight them at ground level outside the gate. Garrick's eyes widened. But that's suicide. Sandor's scar twitched. We die here if we do nothing. Get moving. As Garrick rushed off, Sandor locked eyes again on the giant. The undead beast lifted its club high, ready to strike another blow. Archers loosed a barrage of flaming arrows. Some lodged in the giant's chest, igniting its fur. It roared, toppling backward for a moment. Sandor snarled in triumph. Then he saw White Walker move to the giant's side, raising a hand. Frost spread over the flames, dousing them. The giant rose once more, staggering but still mobile. So this was it, the battle for the living. Sandor thought of all the times he had survived by a hair's breadth, all the men he had killed, all the miseries he had endured. It had been leading to this, hadn't it? A savage grin formed on his lips, equal parts fury and determination. If he was to die, it would not be cowering at the top of a wall. He turned to the men around him, voice echoing. Form up. We hold this position. If they breach the gate, we'll meet them in the courtyard. No retreat. A ragged chorus of "I" answered him. The men steeled themselves. Some were pale, some trembling, but in their eyes he saw that spark of courage or desperation that turns men into heroes or corpses. Sandor felt the flames of his own wrath rise, fueled by the injustice of the living world ignoring them, fueled by the memory of that wildling camp slaughter, fueled by the raw defiance of a man who had been beaten, burned, and battered yet still stood. He stared down at the horde. The White Walkers stared back. Above them, the night sky seemed to close in as if the darkness itself hungered for the outcome. Sandor gripped the hilt of his sword, knuckles white. It was time. The living would fight and either throw back the shadow of death or be consumed by it. The whites slammed against the wall like a relentless tide, their claws scraping the ice in a maddening symphony. Sandor paced back and forth along the top, looking for weak spots, urging the archers to keep firing, keep launching those flaming arrows. The flames were their best ally, licking hungrily down at the undead mass below. But there were too many. Every time a cluster of whites collapsed in a howling blaze, another wave surged from the darkness beyond, feet crunching on the snow, blank eyes fixated on the living. They had prepared for a night like this, but preparing for a nightmare and living it were two different things. The men's faces shone with sweat despite the freezing wind, some were pale with terror, but they held the line. Bolts and arrows hissed down, hoarsely shouted orders ricocheted through the icy air. Beneath it all, the fire roared, devouring both white and man when the barrels fell in the wrong place. With a roar of its own, the giant smashed its club again. A spiderweb of cracks spread through the lower section of the ice, and Sandor's heart lurched. Could the wall itself be weakened? The Watch had always believed the wall was too thick, too tall, too infused with ancient sorcery to be destroyed by brute force. But faith was a slippery thing. In the face of this new onslaught, he found himself unsure whether the old spells would truly hold forever. This was not some petty band of raiders, this was a legion of the dead, led by beings as cruel and potent as any demon from the old tales. Garrick returned breathless, slamming a fist to his chest in salute. We've got men ready to sortie, Lord Commander, but it's madness down there. The gate's still intact, but they're piling up. Sandor gritted his teeth. If the White Walkers kept conjuring those storms of ice, attacking from range, and the giant kept pounding, eventually something would give. We need to break that big bastard, he growled, leaning over the rampart to watch the monstrous shape batter the thick ice. The giant was wreathed in smoke, its fur singed black and flesh cracking, yet it refused to fall. Get the men in position. We open the gate in 5 minutes, just enough for a small group to slip out. We hit the giant from behind. Garrick's eyes went wide. 5 minutes. Yes, my lord. He vanished down the steps, barking commands all the way. Sandor felt the wind whip around him, cold biting his ears. He glanced at the men around him, their faces flickering orange with reflected flame. Keep pouring oil. Don't let the rest of them climb. If you see a White Walker exposed, aim the dragaglass for it. That includes you, he snapped at the nearest archers. Don't waste those arrows on random corpses. Understood, Lord Commander, they shouted above the din. As they obeyed, Sandor slammed a gauntlet fist into the nearest frozen handhold to steady himself. His mind churned with images, men screaming, the living pitted against an enemy that could not feel pain, that never questioned orders, that would not stop until every beating heart was still. For a moment, he closed his eyes against the swirl of embers rising from below. He had once wanted nothing more than to escape war and the cruelty of men. Now, he commanded a fortress in a battle that dwarfed any petty squabble between kings. Even so, he recognized a sense of grim inevitability. If this was how he was meant to die, so be it. At least it would be on his feet, with sword in hand. giving the devils no quarter. He let out a sharp breath and hurried toward the stairs, calling for men to gather. A handful met him at the gate mechanism on the inside of the castle yard, each wearing expressions that mingled excitement and dread. Among them was Orland, an older ranger who had a scar across his left eye, and young Daniel, the stable boy turned soldier. Runa had also come, hair tangled around her shoulders, gripping a short sword she could barely lift with one hand. When Sandor saw her, he almost told her to step aside, but the look on her face was carved from the same stone as his own. She wanted vengeance for what she had lost. He couldn't deny her that, not when everybody might tip the balance. "Listen," Sandor began, raising his voice so all could hear. "We're going out the gate. We circle around to where that giant's pounding the wall. We bring it down from behind. If we can kill that damn thing, maybe they'll think twice. Or maybe we'll just take one piece of the threat off the board. Either way, we can't let it keep hammering us." His gaze swept over them. "Stick together. Watch each other's backs. If a white walker appears, call out. Remember, dragonglass for them. Flame for the whites. Don't let yourselves get surrounded." The men nodded. A few swallowed hard. Runa gripped her sword tighter. "We're with you, Lord Commander," Garrick said quietly, having rejoined the group. Sandor frowned. "That doesn't make it any less insane. But let's go." He ordered the hoisting mechanism Enga. "Get." A set of winches cranked, gears squealing in protest at the cold. An inner iron gate rattled upward. Beyond, a short passage stood between them and the heavy outer doors, which were banded with more iron and thick wooden beams. Through the small arrow slits, they could hear the moaning of the dead. The memory of that sound, somewhere between a plea and a snarl, would never leave them. With a few swift motions, the men inside slid aside the beams bracing the outer doors. Then, with a heave, they pulled one door open just enough for a few men to squeeze through at a time. The wind outside rushed in, bringing the stench of rot and smoke. Sandor led the way, sword in one hand, a torch in the other. He ducked out, boots crunching on snow dyed black with ash and gore. Behind him, the group followed. Once they were clear, the door slammed shut again, locking them out with the monsters. The night sky hung low, as if the darkness had taken form and was leaning in. Around them, the clash and scrape of whites filled the air. Sandor motioned for the men to keep low and follow the castle's outer wall, hugging the shadows. A few whites spotted them, ragged figures stumbling forward with bared teeth. Marek, the Sellsword's bastard, lunged with a flaming brand, driving them back. Garrick stabbed one through the chest, it quivered, then collapsed as the blade severed its spine. Sandor stomped another's skull under his boot. The creature went limp, but only after a grotesque wriggle, as if it refused to acknowledge death. They advanced around the corner, the fortress wall looming above them. Dark shapes milled ahead, whites piling onto each other, some trying to climb. The giant's roars echoed, accompanied by another thunderous impact. Splinters of ice rained down. Sandor hissed a command, and the group spread out, forming a wedge that cut through the whites in their path. Torch flames danced, lighting scenes of horror, half-eaten corpses, twisted limbs, eyes glowing with an unholy light. Runa slashed at one white that lunged at her, nearly lost her sword, but Garrick finished it off. Step by step, they forced their way toward the giant's flank. Fire was their shield. Men thrust torches in front of them, forcing the dead to recoil. Behind the torches came steel, biting through undead flesh. And yet each kill felt temporary, as if the hateful spirit in these corpses hovered, ready to rise again unless burned to nothing. Sandor led at the front, swinging his sword in lethal arcs, cleaving heads from shoulders, hacking limbs. This was a far cry from a neat joust in King's Landing. It was ugly, brutal work. Blood and ichor sprayed. The stench made a few men retch even as they fought. But there was no room for weakness. The ring of steel against bone punctuated every heartbeat. Then, through a break in the swarm, they saw the giant up close. It reeked of burned hair and charred flesh, its torso still smoking from arrow impacts. One eye was missing, the socket glowing a sickly blue. Its lips were drawn back in a frozen snarl. Each breath rattled with a sound like rocks grinding. This was no longer a creature of the free folk, it was a weapon of the others. The hoarse cry that came from its throat set the men's teeth on edge. Sandor raised his torch. "Go for its legs," he shouted, voice hoarse with exertion. "If we bring it down, we can finish it." Garrick and two others darted left, brandishing axes. Runa and Marek moved to the right, trying to get clear of the whites that still pressed in from all sides. The giant, as if sensing fresh prey, turned with a ponderous movement and swung its great club. The air hummed with the sheer force of it. One man wasn't quick enough, he was hurled aside like a rag doll, bones crunching audibly. The rest of or rolled, cursing. Sandor sprinted forward, hooking an arm around a White's neck and throwing it aside as if it weighed nothing. He closed in on the giant's flank, brandishing both torch and sword. Its legs were thick as tree trunks, blackened in places where the flesh had burned away to expose sinew. He hacked at the hamstring, steel biting into rotting muscle. The creature let out a piercing bellow. It brought the club around in a backhanded sweep. Sandor ducked, but the impact still caught him on the shoulder, sending him skidding over the slick ground. His sword clattered away and his vision blurred from the pain. Before the giant could smash him into pulp, Marek dashed in, screaming a war cry. The Sellsword's bastard planted a dragonglass-tipped spear in the giant's side. Smoke sizzled where the obsidian touched undead flesh, and the giant roared louder, staggering. Garrick and two others seized the chance to hack at its other leg with axes. Chunks of rotten flesh came away. The giant collapsed to one knee, flailing. Sandor rolled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. He grabbed a fallen torch, Runa's, he realized, and drove it into the giant's exposed thigh, setting what remained of its fur clothing ablaze. The stench was horrific, but the effect was immediate. Flames crawled up the giant's body, and the undead creature let out a tortured wail that shattered the night. Its enormous arms thrashed, scattering the smaller Whites around it. "Finish it!" Sandor roared, staggering back as the heat seared his lungs. "Drive the spear deeper." Marek obliged, planting his boot on the giant's flank and shoving the obsidian tip in further, right up to the shaft. A sickly light flared, then the giant's eyes dulled, the hateful glow winking out. It sagged forward, supported only by its burning flesh. The watchers scrambled away just as it collapsed in a crackling bonfire of black smoke. For a heartbeat, none of them could speak, all half-deaf from the giant's final roar. Then Sandor spotted more Whites converging on them. He lifted his torch in a silent command, rallying his men. Back to the gate. They had done what they came for, to linger was death. They just had to hope the giant's end would give the defenders on the wall a moment's reprieve. They turned and fought their way back through the horde. The Whites came at them in waves now, legs flailing, arms grasping, jaws snapping. Runa's face was a mask of horror as she swung her blade, severing a White's hand. Garrick battered one aside with his shield. Another White lunged at Sandor, teeth bared in a silent scream. He smashed it with the torch, setting its hair aflame. It clawed at him even as it burned, drawing bright lines of blood across his cheek before he could yank away. He stomped its skull underfoot. Somewhere behind them, a White Walker's inhuman cry pierced the din. Sandor felt an icy stab of dread. If the Walkers themselves joined the fray out here, their group would be doomed. He glanced around, saw no sign of those tall, lithe shapes, only the swirling snow, the flicker of flames, and the writhing mass of corpses. A stroke of luck, perhaps, or the others were busy focusing on the main assault. Either way, they had no time to spare. They reached the gate, pounded with fists and swords. "Open up! Open!" Garrick shouted, voice raw. The answer was a grinding of bolts and iron. Slowly, the door cracked open, revealing the tense faces of men inside. Sandor urged his companions through, practically hurling Runa inside. The last of them slipped past just before a surge of Whites crashed against the doors, clawing and screeching. The defenders slammed the beams back in place, reinforcing the barrier. The gates shuddered under the weight of the assault, but for now they held. Inside the yard, torches and braziers lit the churned-up snow, which was stained red and black. The men who had remained stood in a loose defensive formation, eyes wide with relief to see Sandor and his party return. Some hammered nails into extra planks, reinforcing the walls around the gate. Others caught their breath, leaning on spears. Daniel, the stable boy, had taken up a crossbow and was perched on a crate, scanning for any sign of breach. Sandor wiped a sleeve across his bloody cheek, spitting to clear the acrid taste of smoke in his mouth. The giants finished, he rasped to the nearest officer. "That should help." "Aye," the man replied, half in disbelief. "Good work, Lord Commander." He gestured behind him. "But there's more trouble inside. Some Whites got in through a damaged sally port on the far side of the castle. They're in the old stables." Sandor swore. It never ended. "You," he pointed to Garrick and a few others who still seemed hale. "With me. The rest of you, hold the gate." He turned to Runa, who was clutching a stitch in her side, sweat mixing with tears on her face. "Stay here," he growled. "You've done enough." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but her shoulders slumped. She had lost her sword in the chaos anyway, and she was trembling too hard to hold another. At last, she nodded and sank onto a block of wood, burying her face in her hands. Sandor strode across the courtyard. ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Buildings cast long shadows in the flickering torchlight. The smithy, the barracks, the old stables with collapsed roofing in some areas. Screams echoed from within. Some men had apparently gone in to deal with the intruders, but the shrieks suggested a losing battle. A swirl of snow caught in the crosscurrents of wind, drifting across the open ground. He kicked in the stable door, splinters flying. Inside, the reek of old hay mingled with decay. A half-dozen wights lurched around, cornering two watch brothers near a rickety ladder that led to the loft. One brother was bleeding profusely from a bite on his arm. The other was trying to hold them off with a pitchfork. "Burn them out," Sandor shouted to his men. One of them lobbed a lantern, which shattered against the hay, igniting with a whoosh. Flames burst to life, forcing the wights back. The watch brothers dove aside, coughing in the sudden smoke. The wights shrieked as the fire caught their ragged clothes. Two collapsed at once. Another started forward, but Sandor slammed it with his shoulder, sending it sprawling into the flames. The smell of burning flesh churned his stomach, but he powered through, stomping on any twitching limb that tried to crawl away. Garrick slashed at a wight that was skirting the edges of the blaze, severing its left arm. It hissed, raking at him with the other, but a second slash took its head. The body staggered a moment, then fell limp. Another man kicked a last wight into the heart of the inferno, where it flailed once before collapsing into embers. Within moments, the old stables were engulfed. The two watch brothers coughed and stumbled out into the yard. One collapsed at Sandor's feet, eyes wild. "Thank you, Commander," he gasped, tears cutting through the grime on his cheeks. The other moaned in pain, clutching the vicious wound on his arm, black lines already spidering from the bite. Sandor grimaced. "Get him to the maester," he barked, though they barely had a maester at Castle Black these days. More a half-trained steward who knew basic healing. Still, it was better than nothing. Outside, the snow started falling heavier, blanketing the courtyard. Sandor tilted his head back, letting the cold flakes brush his face, but he saw no stars, only the swirling void. Above the battlements, he glimpsed more bursts of flame as the defenders continued raining death on the undead below. The horns kept blowing in desperate blasts, sometimes two in a row if more wights were sighted, sometimes three to signal that a White Walker was attacking. The entire fortress thrummed with panic and resolve in equal measure. He gathered Garrick and a few others in a cluster by the well, where they could catch their breath. The men were battered, soaked in gore, some trembling with exhaustion. "We took out that giant," he said, voice low, "but we've still got White Walkers out there. We have to keep them from breaching the main gate or scaling the wall." Garrick nodded grimly. "We'll hold. The men on top say they're still dumping oil and flaming pitch on them. The losses for the Whites must be high, but they don't care about losses. That's the trouble," Sandor muttered. "They don't tire. We do." He took a moment to wrap a quick bandage around the claw marks on his cheek, wincing at the sting. "If the others break the gate or the walls, all of this is for nothing." A trembling steward jogged up, stuttering out a message. "Lord Commander, they're calling for you at the top of the wall. Something's happening with the White Walkers near the center of their line." Sandor exchanged a look with Garrick. "Go. Help keep order here," he told the ranger. "Make sure no more Whites slip through any hidden doors. I'll see what's happening." Garrick nodded, though he looked as though he would have preferred to stay by Sandor's side. Sandor shouldered his blade and made his way toward the stairs, passing men who were rushing in the other direction with barrels and torches, faces streaked with soot and fear. The climb seemed endless, every step jarring his bruised muscles. By the time he reached the top, his breath burned in his lungs, but he ignored it. The scene that met his eyes was one of near-apocalyptic fury. The battlefield below the wall was a furnace of flame and shadow. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Whites sprawled in grotesque piles, many still burning. Some had been torn apart by catapult fire or the collapse of the giant. It was carnage worthy of any story told around a fireside. But in the distance, more forms were emerging out of the darkness, as if the night itself bred fresh horrors. And at the heart of them stood 5 tall silhouettes, White Walkers, their every motion brimming with icy malice. Sandor peered down, trying to discern what new tactic they employed. One walker lifted its sword high, and the air around it seemed to shimmer. Then came a sight that knotted his gut. bodies on the ground stirred and began to rise. Whites that had fallen minutes ago, scorched but not wholly destroyed, now staggered to their feet. Even some of the watch's own dead jerked upright, twisting as if pulled on invisible strings. The men on the wall cried out in horror. "No, no, no," one archer moaned. "They're raising our dead too?" Sandor's lips curled back from his teeth in pure fury. This was the reason so many fought to burn every corpse. But in a battlefield chaos, many remained unburned. Now those same bodies rose, weapons still in their hands, eyes turned a glacial blue. They pivoted, scanning for living flesh to rend. If they turned on the watchman in the yard, it would be a slaughter from the inside out. He shouted to the archers, "Aim at the ones that just rose, bring them down again. Don't hesitate if it's a face you knew." This was the cost of the long night. A friend in life could become your killer in death. No hesitation was possible if you wanted to survive. They obeyed, loosing arrows at the newly risen whites. A few shots hit home, dropping them in heaps. Others missed in the swirling snow or lodged harmlessly in limbs that would not stop moving. It was a ghastly spectacle, men who had fought valiantly minutes before now mindless husks, forced by unholy magic to tear down the very place they died defending. He tore his gaze from the tragedy and fixed it on the White Walkers orchestrating the horror. If they could be slain, the dead might lose their animating force or at least slow down. He looked around, grabbed the nearest man. "Where are the dragonglass arrows? We need to concentrate fire on those walkers." "Gone, M-Lord," the man stammered. "We used most of them trying to keep them back, and the rest." "Then find me something," Sandor snarled, cutting him off. "Blades, arrowheads, shards, anything. We'll do it face to face if we must." The man blanched but sprinted away. From the northern side of the ramparts, a sudden shriek drew Sandor's attention. A section of the wooden scaffolding had given way under the repeated blasts of ice magic. Several men plunged to their deaths in the swirl of flames below. A White Walker stood at the base of that section, arms raised. Sheets of frost raced up the ice, creating bizarre patterns that glinted in the firelight. Snow whipped around the creature like a living cloak. Sandor could see its pale, inhuman features for just an instant, gaunt cheeks, eyes that smoldered with blue fire, a mouth set in a cruel line. It was controlling the storm itself, forging pathways of ice that let the whites scale the wall more easily. "Damn it all," Sandor growled. He turned to the archers. "Focus on that one. Don't let it keep freezing the wall." A volley of arrows flew. The White Walker blurred sideways with eerie grace, each arrow missing by a hair. Then a swirling barrier of snow obscured it. The watchers swore, knocking more arrows, unsure where to aim. At that moment, the man Sandor had sent off returned, clutching 3 dragonglass-tipped spears and a handful of arrowheads. His breath puffed in frantic bursts. "This is all we've got, Lord Commander. The rest are gone or used up." Sandor scowled. "Fine. Hand me one." He seized a spear, tested its balance. It was lighter than he preferred, but obsidian made for a fragile weapon anyway. "Garrick," he shouted, forgetting momentarily that the ranger was below. Another black brother stepped up, Borand, a barrel-chested man who had once been rumored to be in the running for Lord Commander. Borand's face was smeared with soot and he panted from exertion. "Lord Commander, I can throw a spear if you want," Borand offered, hefting one of the obsidian-tipped weapons. "I used to hunt boar in the Stormlands." "Good." Sandor pointed toward the swirling snow barrier. "That walker's behind that. The moment it shows itself, you let fly. Aim for its torso. Don't take chances with a headshot. The rest of you, keep it distracted if you can." He looked at the other men holding the arrowheads. "When that damn thing is exposed, fire." They nodded, swallowing hard. Sandor gripped the spear, his shoulders tense. He wasn't fond of spear throwing, he was more a swordsman or axeman. But dragonglass swords were scarce, so this was what they had. He tried to calm his breathing. The wind whipped ice crystals against his scarred cheek, stinging the cuts. Suddenly, the snow barrier parted. The White Walker stepped forth, eyes gleaming. It raised its sword, a slender blade of crystalline ice. At that exact moment, another volley of normal arrows flew from the archers. The walker dodged with inhuman speed, but in doing so, it moved directly into Borand's line of sight. Borand hurled his spear with all his might. The obsidian tip glinted in the torchlight, then the walker twisted at the last moment. The spear struck its shoulder rather than its chest. For an instant, the White Walker froze in place, an eerie shriek breaking from its lips. Cracks of white spread across its form where the spear had lodged, like fractures in frozen glass. The watchers above sucked in breath, hope flaring in their eyes. The walker staggered. Sandor saw his chance. Before fear or reason could stop him, he raised his own spear and hurled it. The spear whistled downward, cutting the wind. The White Walker half-turned, trying to bring its sword up, but it was slowed by the first impact. Sandor's spear took it in the lower back, lodging deep. Another shriek rent the air, more cracks forming, spiderwebbing across the creature's entire body. It collapsed to one knee, the swirling storm around it faltering. Yes, one of the archers gasped. Men let out ragged cheers. But the walker still lived, though black fluid seeped from the wounds. It glared up at them, face twisted in rage. Summoning a loss. Burst of its power, it slammed a hand against the ice. A shockwave of frost climbed the wall, freezing everything in its path, including two men who couldn't leap aside fast enough. Their screams cut off as ice encased them. Boren scrambled back, cursing. The rest of the watchers recoiled from the chill creeping up the ramparts. But the White Walker was done. It tried to stand, took a single step, then shattered with a sound like glass meeting a hammer. Pieces of its form scattered across the snow, dissolving into a fine powder that blew away on the wind. The watchers roared, exulting in a kill few men ever witnessed. One White Walker down. Yet the others remained. Sandor let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced over the side again. The line of White Walkers in the distance had parted, their silent command perhaps faltering as one of their own fell. Or maybe it was only a momentary ripple of interest. The undead below continued to surge, but a slight hesitation rippled through their movements. The watchers capitalized on it, loosing more fire barrels, more arrows. Night wore on into what felt like years. The watchers held the wall. The whites battered at the gate. Now and then a White Walker advanced to conjure blasts of cold or attempt to break a section of the wall's outer fortifications, only to be met with a hail of desperate resistance. Sandor lost track of time, consumed by the endless rhythm of shouting orders, hauling barrels, hurling torches, and stabbing whatever undead reached the top. His men were beyond exhaustion. Some collapsed, others fought on in a state of near delirium. The fortress was littered with bodies, both friend and foe, some burned to ash, some frozen solid. At one point, he forced himself to gulp down a few swallows of water half-frozen in the canteen. The small comfort reminded him he was alive, that he still felt pain and hunger and thirst. He could not say how many men had fallen. The numbers bled together in the frantic haze. Gradually, the tide of whites seemed to ebb. Too many had been burned. The others, as if sensing the kill was no longer easy, began to retreat. Sandor, peering over the rampart, watched as the lines of dead peeled away, drawn back by some silent command. This was not a rout, they did not flee in disarray. It was more like a disciplined withdrawal, as if the White Walkers had decided this was not the moment for victory. Men slumped in relief, some weeping openly. Others shook, adrenaline leaving them in uncontrollable tremors. The night sky above began to lighten to a dim gray as dawn approached, if dawn could be said to exist in this near-perpetual winter gloom. Yet they had survived the first massive assault. The ground before the wall was a charnel field of twisted, smoldering bodies. Sandor felt no triumph. This battle had been won, but at a terrible price. And he knew in his marrow that the others would come again, perhaps stronger than ever. Still, for one fleeting moment, the living held the wall. He descended slowly, leaning on a broken shaft of wood. His left arm hung stiffly at his side. He'd wrenched his shoulder when the giant struck him, and now it throbbed with every step. The courtyard was quieter than before, moans of the wounded mingled with the hiss of dying fires. Some of the fort's timbered buildings continued to smolder. Men paced back and forth, searching for survivors, pulling away debris. A few battered wildlings stood with them, exhaustion etched on their faces. Runa was among them, handing out cups of water to the wounded, her eyes still red but her hands steady as she helped stanch bleeding or wrap bandages. She had found her purpose in the aftermath. Garrick limped over, leaning on a spear. "They're gone for now," he said, voice numb with fatigue. "We did it." Sandor shook his head. "We survived one night. They'll be back." He surveyed the destruction. The main gate was battered, but still stood. The eastern side of the castle was charred from the stable fire, and the walkway above had partially collapsed. The yard was littered with corpses, many of which would need burning. "Get the men to gather the dead," he said. "Burn everything that doesn't breathe. If any still cling to life, try to save them. Get them warm. We can't let them freeze into whites." Garrick nodded. "Aye, Lord Commander." Even as the ranger limped away, one of the younger recruits approached. His face was streaked with soot and tear tracks. "My lord, the men are saying you faced down a walker. That you killed one." Sandor exhaled wearily. "I threw a spear. That's all there was to it. Now go help with the bodies." He didn't have the energy to indulge hero worship. The recruit blinked, then scampered off. Sandor pushed a strand of damp hair from his forehead. He was bone-tired, but there was too much to do: tally the losses, reorganize the watch rotations, see if the ravens had brought any more worthless replies from the south. But first, he forced himself to walk the perimeter, checking on the men, offering a nod or a few quiet words when he could find them. He saw Runa carefully covering the face of a dead boy, likely no older than 12. Another recruit lay face down near the smithy, his broken sword still clutched in stiff fingers. A hush fell over the fortress as the living took stock of the dead. This was a bitter victory, if victory it was. Near dawn, he finally found a moment to sit. He slumped against a half-collapsed crate behind the armory, eyes drifting shut of their own accord. The cold tugged at him, threatening to lull him into a deadly sleep, but he forced himself to stay awake. Memories of the battle churned in his mind like a fever dream: the giant's roar, the White Walker's icy shriek, the swarm of whites climbing over each other in mindless hunger. The terror was real, but so was the rage that had kept him upright. Soon enough, Garrick found him again, face grim. "Lord Commander, they're taking the wounded into the common hall. Some won't last till midday. We're running out of bandages, out of everything." Sandor nodded, pushing himself upright with a wince. "Let's do what we can. Have the stewards rip up spare clothes for bandages. Use pitch or hot irons to cauterize what we must." He ran a hand over his scarred face, remembering the pain of burns all too well, but also knowing it might be the only way to save men from a festering wound. "And send a party to gather snow for melting. We'll need fresh water." As Garrick turned to go, Sandor called out, "Wait, do we still have the wildling woman's boy? Runa's son?" "Aye, the child is safe, though frightened. She's kept him close. We're giving them a corner in the kitchen to rest." "Good," Sandor said. "Keep an eye on them. They've proven themselves." The last words came out grudgingly, but he meant them. The lines between wildling and brother had blurred in this desperate fight for survival. Hours passed in a blur of triage and damage control. Sandor personally helped toss the remaining white corpses onto a mass pyre outside the gates, a grim labor that left him coated in ash and clinging bits of charred flesh. By the time the sun had reached its zenith, faint and pale behind the clouds, Castle Black resembled a battlefield infirmary. Makeshift stretchers lined the courtyard, while plumes of smoke drifted into the sky from the constant funeral fires. Men shivered even in daylight, scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy's return. When none came immediately, some dared to hope that the others had withdrawn for good. But Sandor knew better. This was only a reprieve, a test of the Watch's defenses. The next assault might be worse. Late in the afternoon, he assembled the surviving officers in what remained of the common hall. The room stank of sweat, blood, and stale fear. They gathered around a scorched table, half of them bandaged or limping. Ser Dern was there, face drawn. Garrick, Borand, Orland all bore fresh wounds. A few new faces joined them: Harathritos, the wildling raider who had decided to stand with the Watch, and a couple of the more capable stewards. They were the best leaders they had left. Sandor spoke plainly, leaning on the table with both hands. "We held them off. Good. But we lost too many. I need a head count of how many men are still fit to fight." Ser Dern cleared his throat. "Rough estimate is just under 100 able-bodied. Another 50 or so are too wounded to stand guard anytime soon. Another dozen near death." He paused, glancing at the sooty ceiling. "We started with over 200, Lord Commander. We've lost almost half in one night." A silence fell. No one was surprised, but hearing the numbers cut deeper. Sandor blew out a breath. "We may get more stragglers, wildlings or otherwise, but that won't be enough to replace the losses. We need more men, but the South won't help us in time. So we shore up what we can. We rebuild, we get these men on their feet as best we can, and we prepare for another attack." Garrick nodded grimly. "We've begun repairs on the eastern walkway, but it'll take days, maybe weeks in this cold. As for supplies, use anything we have," Sandor broke in. "Tear down any building we can spare for wood if that's what we need." He pressed his bandaged fingers against a throbbing temple. "We also need more dragoglass. Anyone know where we can get it?" Borand hesitated. "We found some deposits on Dragonstone in the past, but that's far south, across the sea from King's Landing. There's also rumored pockets in the mountains beyond Eastwatch, but that's deep in territory that might be crawling with the dead." Sandor grimaced. "Send word to Eastwatch anyway, or any other place that might have a stash. We can't fight White Walkers without it. And for now, we gather every shard we can find in the castle, from arrowheads to broken pieces. We do what we must." Another heavy silence. Harathritos cleared his throat. "Lord Commander, the free folk that remain to the north might join us if we reach them first. They'd rather fight beside us than be turned into whites. I'm willing to go find them. but I'd need a small band, supplies. And risk them being picked off by the others? Ser Durin said sharply. We have so few men left, can we spare them for a mission north? Hara's thick shoulders shrugged. We can't survive alone. The more living we bring behind the wall, the stronger we'll be. If you think we can hold off the White Walkers without more bodies, you're a fool. Sandor watched the exchange. Part of him balked at sending men out when they were so few. Another part recognized the truth in Hara's words. Any free folk left alive in the wilderness were either going to die or join the army of the dead if no one helped them. All right, he said finally. We'll give you a small party, volunteers only. You go quick and quiet. Find any pockets of wildlings and bring them here if they're willing. And keep your eyes out for dragoglass deposits. If the situation is too dangerous, you come back. Understood. Hara nodded. Understood, Lord Commander. They discussed more logistical matters, food distribution, watch rotations, and the grim necessity of preparing funeral pyres for their own men. When at last the meeting ended, each departed with the weariness of one who has fought a war that is far from finished. Sandor lingered behind, staring at the battered table, the flickering shadows on the walls. Once he had been a solitary hound, biting only when cornered. Now an entire fortress looked to him for guidance. He felt the weight of it more than ever. He forced himself to stand and walk, ignoring the aches in his body. In the courtyard, men shoveled snow onto smoldering embers, trying to keep the flames contained. A group of wounded sat in a corner, receiving what comfort their fellows could offer. Runa was there, stroking her son's hair as he slept fitfully. She caught Sandor's eye and gave him a tired nod. He returned it, the closest he could manage to gratitude. Without her quick thinking and others like her, they would have lost even more. Throughout the day, the men scoured the battlefield for anything salvageable, arrows, weapons, a few shields that hadn't burned. They stacked bodies in great heaps outside, setting them alight to prevent them from becoming whites. Thick, dark smoke rose into the sky, the smell clinging to clothes and hair. By dusk, everyone moved like wraiths themselves, faces hollow with exhaustion. Night came, but there was no fresh assault. The remaining watchers peered over the wall, seeing only blackness. It was as if the others had melted into the deeper night beyond the flames. Some men dared to speak of hope, perhaps the White Walkers had lost heart. More experienced souls silenced them, pointing out that the others did not know fear. They would come again, though no one could say when. Sandor found his way to the old Lord Commander's chamber, now his chamber, and sank onto the mean bed without bothering to remove his boots. He laid his sword within arm's reach, a habit he'd never break. For a time he stared at the ceiling. The events of the night replayed in a loop, the howls of the giant, the shriek of the walker as dragoglass spears impaled it. Eventually he drifted into a fitful sleep, full of images of corpses scaling the wall, only to erupt in flames. He woke in darkness to the sound of footsteps outside his door. A voice whispered, "Lord Commander? Are you awake?" It was Garrick. Sandor eased the door open, sword in hand. "What is it now?" he rasped. The ranger's face was barely visible by the light of a single torch. "No threat," he said quickly. "Just, we got a raven. From Winterfell, if you can believe it. The new steward was reading it, said you should see it right away." Sandor rubbed a hand over his good eye. Winterfell. He recalled the old days, serving as Joffrey's dog, hearing about the Starks and their hold in the north. So many of them gone now, Ned Stark beheaded, Robb Stark murdered, but rumors said the younger ones might yet live. Who ruled there now? The news changed every other day. "Fine," he grunted. "Let's see what they have to say." In the flickering torchlight, they made their way to the small tower room where ravens were kept. The new steward on duty was a wiry youth named Fen. He offered Sandor a tattered piece of parchment. "It's short, Lord Commander, but look at the seal." Sandor squinted. Indeed, the letter bore the dire wolf of House Stark pressed in black wax. That alone was surprising. He read aloud to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. "We have received your plea. We prepare what men we can spare. We know the threat is real. Winter is here. We stand with you." It was signed simply Stark. He read it twice, perplexed at the brevity. But perhaps that was all that needed saying. Garrick's eyebrows lifted. "They stand with us? That means the new lords of Winterfell might be sending help." Sandor said slowly, folding the letter. "But we'll see how many men they can muster." He remembered the rumors that Sansa Stark, once the girl he'd tried to protect, had reclaimed her home. Or was it another Stark? The details were muddled by rumor. Either way, if any of them lived, it was at least possible they understood the northern threat. "Send a raven back," Sandor added. "Tell them we need dragonglass, men, and supplies. Urgently. And tell them the others have already attacked." Fen nodded, hastily scribbling down the message. Sandor left the tower with Garrick in tow, both weighed down by cautious hope. Winterfell's support might be something, though how quickly it could arrive was another question. The rest of the night passed quietly. The men maintained extra watches, gazing into the gloom. Some claimed to see shapes moving far off, but no horns sounded. By dawn, the siege had not resumed. The following days saw a flurry of frantic repair work. Men labored to fix the battered gates, to shore up weak points in the walls. They melted snow for water, rationed food, and used the simplest of cloth scraps as bandages. A sense of grim determination pervaded the fortress. This time, they knew what was coming. They would be ready, or as ready as mortal men could be. Hara-3-Os set out with a band of wildlings and a few black brothers, just 10 in total, to search for any free folk that might still be alive and willing to join the cause. Sandor warned him to keep a wide berth of any large gatherings of whites and to return if they found nothing. The mission was risky, but the potential reward was new allies. If the free folk wanted to fight for survival, Castle Black was their last refuge. Meanwhile, letters came in dribs and drabs from other northern houses, each acknowledging the threat. None promised large forces. The Karstarks wrote to say they were engaged in local skirmishes with bandits. The Mandalis, rumored to be rebuilding White Harbor, offered some food stores but little in the way of soldiers. Days stretched into a tense vigil, each sunrise a reprieve, each night a new terror. But the others did not return in force, only a few scattered whites wandered close, easily cut down or burned. Sandor spent the lull pushing the men to train relentlessly. He took to the yard himself, showing them how to strike at a white's joints to dismember it quickly, or how to use torches to create a moment's opening. His voice rang across the yard. Speed and precision, that's what matters. They don't fear your sword, so you make them fear the flame. He singled out veterans like Garrick to refine their drills, forcing them to adapt to the bizarre, tireless style of the undead. No elegant swordplay here, only savage hacking that had to be done before the enemy got its own claws in. In a rare private moment, he knelt beside the fire in his chamber, letting the warmth wash over him. He still felt the old dread, the memory of flames licking his face. Yet, ironically, fire was now his ally against the freezing shadows of the White Walkers. He stared at the flickering coals, thinking of all the wrongs he had done, all the times he had chosen brutality or apathy. Now he faced a threat that made those past sins small in comparison. Protecting the realm, perhaps there was a measure of redemption in that, even if he scoffed at the word. On the 5th day after the great assault, a horn blast announced a returning party. Sandor hurried to the gate, sword at his side. The watchman peered out over the ramparts and saw Hara's small group trudging through the snow, accompanied by a dozen newcomers, wildlings. Many looked half-starved, frostbitten, eyes-haunted. One of them held a child bundled in skins. Hara's face was streaked with fresh cuts, but he seemed intact. Once inside, the wildlings huddled near the fire in the yard, suspicious and wary. Sandor approached Hara, who offered a curt nod. We found a few clans scattered. Most had been wiped out or already turned. These ones, they decided to come south with us rather than risk it out there. He shook his head, a tremor in his gravelly voice. Saw some horrible things, Lord Commander. Whole valleys crawling with whites, old castles overrun. The free folk are nearly gone. Sandor absorbed the news in stony silence. He glanced at the wildlings. They carried battered weapons and wore threadbare furs. Perhaps they would add only a small handful of fighters, but every blade might matter. You did well, he said. Get food and warmth for these people. Hara gave a grunt that might have been thanks. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. We also saw a thing out on the ice, heading east. Looked like some abomination. Part giant, part bear maybe. It was rot. Ed to the bone. 3 White Walkers leading it. They're gathering beasts now, making them into whites too. Sandor's eyes narrowed. He had heard stories of undead bears, giant ice spiders, all manner of nightmares. If the others truly commanded every dead creature in the north, they could assemble a legion beyond imagination. Then we keep the fires burning, he said, and we pray to whatever gods might listen. That night, the new arrivals gathered around a communal fire in the courtyard, sharing tales of their escape. Some of the watch joined them, forging tentative camaraderie. Runa played a small role, passing bowls of stew. Even the child she had with her seemed a bit brighter, though the boy still looked frightened at every shadow. Sandor lingered at a distance, observing with an odd mixture of relief and sadness. This was what unity looked like, former enemies huddled side by side against a greater evil. It shouldn't have taken the threat of an undead apocalypse to make men see reason. But perhaps that was the way of the world. When dawn came again, faint and pale, Sandor was up on the wall, scanning the horizon. He saw no sign of the others, only miles of unbroken snow and the occasional drift of blackened corpses that had been left to the crows. But he felt a tension in the air, as if the north itself was holding its breath. The wind hissed against the ice, carrying faint echoes of something older than men. A ragged cough broke his reverie. Boren stood there, rubbing his gloved hands. "You really think we can hold them if they come in greater numbers?" Sandor was silent for a moment, gaze fixed on that endless white. "I don't know," he finally answered. "But we'll try. That's all we can do." Boren nodded, shoulders slumping. "Aye. Maybe Winterfell will send enough men to make a difference." "Maybe," Sandor said. The word hung in the frosty air, a slim thread of hope. In his gut, though, he suspected they would face the next onslaught before any meaningful help arrived. Another day passed, then another. Scouts reported scattered sightings of whites near the coast, but no concerted attacks on Eastwatch or the Shadow Tower. It was as if the others were simply biding their time, letting the cold do their work for them. Castle Black shored its defenses, rechecking every possible entry point, piling more wood for fires. The blacksmith hammered day and night, forging new arrowheads from scraps of steel. None of it felt like enough. One frigid morning, the watchers atop the wall spotted silhouettes on the King's Road. At first, some feared it was an army of the dead, but soon they realized these figures moved with discipline, flying banners that snapped in the wind. An actual host from the south, and with them supply wagons. Word spread like wildfire. "They've come. Reinforcements." Sandor hurried down to the courtyard as the gates were opened. The first men who entered wore cloaks of gray and white with a direwolf sigil displayed on their surcoats. Behind them were soldiers bearing the colors of various minor northern houses. In all, a few hundred men, more than enough to tip the balance if they were truly ready for battle. At their head rode a tall figure in dark furs, face half hidden by a hood. When the rider pushed the hood back, Sandor glimpsed a face framed by auburn hair. Lady Sansa Stark. Her bearing was proud, though her eyes held weariness. She dismounted, speaking quietly with an aide before turning to face Sandor. For a moment, neither spoke. They had once shared a night of terror in King's Landing when the city burned and Joffrey reigned. He had tried to save her in his own clumsy way. She had once looked at him with fear and pity. "Sandon Clegane," she said at last, stepping forward. The men around her tensed, unsure of the greeting. "Or shall I say, Lord Commander?" He inclined his head, uncertain how formal to be. "You've come a long way, my lady." She nodded, gaze flicking to his scars. "We heard your call. Winterfell stands with the Night's Watch. We've brought what men and supplies we could spare." Her voice was steady, though quiet. She looked around, taking in the charred buildings, the makeshift repairs, the exhausted watchers. A flicker of sorrow crossed her face. "I see the threat is as grave as you said." He said nothing for a heartbeat, remembering the terrified girl she'd been. She was no girl now. "Grave enough. We beat back one attack, but we won't endure another without help. If you're here to fight, you're welcome." "I am," she replied simply. Behind her, soldiers began unloading wagons of grain, barrels of fresh water, and crates that clinked with the unmistakable sound of metal. "We have more men on the road to House Mormont, some from the Glovers. They'll arrive within a day or two. Not thousands, but enough to strengthen your defenses." Her blue eyes swept the courtyard, pausing on a heap of still smoldering remains. "We'll do what we can." Sandor exhaled, shoulders easing fractionally. "Then let's get your people inside. They'll need to see the state of the wall, get a sense of the defenses." Her expression softened just for a moment. "Of course." She turned to her retinue, issuing instructions. Some dismounted, leading horses toward what was left of the stables, while others followed stewards into the armory and storerooms. Sandor hovered near Sansa, not sure how to fill the silence between them. She spoke first, lower so others wouldn't hear. "I never expected to see you here, leading them. The last time I saw you, you were leaving King's Landing. I was too afraid to go with you." He felt an old ache at those memories. I never wanted to lead anyone. But life's cruel that way." He shrugged his uninjured shoulder. "I'm here now, and I'm doing what I can." She studied him a moment. "You saved me once. Maybe you'll help save us all now." There was no mockery in her tone, just a quiet acknowledgement of how much had changed. He gave a humorless bark of laughter. "Don't put that weight on me, girl. I'm no hero. I just know how to kill." She didn't flinch at his gruff words. "Perhaps that's enough. Show me the rest of the castle." So he did, guiding her through the courtyard, explaining where the whites had broken in, how they'd burned some buildings to destroy infiltrators. He took her up the wall, letting her see the endless expanse of ice and snow beyond. She stood on the battlements, her hair whipped by the wind, face pale as she gazed where the dead had marched. One of her knights stood protectively by her side, eyeing Sandor with suspicion, but she seemed unafraid or at least determined. "It's worse than the stories," she murmured at last. "I can feel it, the cold, as though it hates us." Sandor nodded. He didn't have pretty words to mask the horror. "That's the truth of it. If you or your people want to turn back, now's the time." She shook her head. "No, I've lost too much already, to Lannisters, to Boltons, to wars that didn't matter. This war matters." Her eyes slid to him. "We stand or fall together." In that moment, Sandor felt a flicker of something he couldn't name. Respect, perhaps, or a shared burden. He simply gave a grunt. "Then let's hope we stand." Over the next few days, the newly arrived soldiers integrated into Castle Black. They were a mix of young knights, hardened northern peasants, and everything in between. They marveled at the height of the wall, shivered in the unrelenting cold, and soon understood the gravity of the threat when they saw the mass graves and heard the accounts of the first attack. Sansa worked diligently with the quartermasters, ensuring the supplies were distributed fairly. Men from Bear Island, taciturn and fierce, arrived as well, led by a gruff captain who pledged all the help they could give. The castle's population swelled beyond any number Sandor had ever seen here, forcing them to pack men into every available chamber and hall. Even so, the sense of relief was tangible. The Night's Watch was no longer alone. During this time, messages flowed between Castle Black and Winterfell. Lady Sansa relayed updates from a surviving Stark sibling, Arya, apparently returned from unimaginable journeys, and from allies as distant as the Vale. Some Knights of the Vale might be riding north, but winter storms slowed them. It was uncertain how soon they might arrive. In the meantime, Sandor put every new soldier to work repairing defenses, forging weapons, and practicing with fire. Sansa herself learned to handle a dragonglass dagger under Sandor's tutelage, though she admitted she preferred to leave such matters to those more skilled. "I'll do what I must," she said, "but I don't relish killing." Sandor only grunted that none of them relished it, except the madman. Still, he showed her how to grip the blade, how to thrust it into the heart or the neck of a wight. It felt surreal, a memory of her as a gentle bird in King's Landing clashed with the steely woman who faced an undead threat. Amid these preparations, the watchers at the top of the wall stayed vigilant. Every day, they scanned the horizon. Every night, they peered into the blackness for any sign of a second onslaught. Some men joked nervously that perhaps the others had lost interest. But those who had seen the first attack knew better. They would come again. The only question was when. That question was answered one icy midnight when a lookout spotted a flicker of movement in the distance, an entire line of torches, or so it seemed. But who among the dead carried torches? As the watchers peered closer, realization sank in. It wasn't torches at all. It was a ghostly glow, pale and shifting, spanning the horizon. Like the reflection of moonlight on ice, except there was no moon visible. A hush fell over the men on the wall. Word reached Sandor quickly. He climbed up, joined by Garrick, Borand, and others who had fought in the first battle. Lady Sansa came too, shrouded in a heavy cloak, flanked by her knights. They all gazed out over the frozen wastes. That shifting glow moved closer, revealing shapes in its midst. More wights than any of them had ever imagined, perhaps 10 times the number that had attacked before, a sea of the dead. Interspersed were monstrous outlines, giant silhouettes, and other horrors. Some looked like hulking beasts on all fours, their limbs too long and distorted to be common bears. Sansa's face grew ashen. "Gods," she whispered. "There are so many." Sandor's jaw tightened until his teeth hurt. "So this is it," he muttered. "The real assault." Below, the fortress stirred. Horns sounded, men rushed to their positions. Fires were lit in great braziers, catapults rolled into place, the ballista loaded with whatever flaming missiles they had left. There was a grim efficiency now. These defenders had practiced their duties day after day. They had done this once before. Lady Sansa drew a sharp breath, then descended the stairs to rally her knights. She might not be a warrior by trade, but she knew how to lead. Atop the wall, Sandor watched the ocean of the undead creep ever closer. He glimpsed flickers of pale light from the ranks of white walkers scattered throughout, their swords shining like shards of starlight. The wind changed, carrying a chorus of low moans. Already, the archers along the battlements lit their arrowheads. The barrels of pitch were readied. He clenched his fists around the cold stone, remembering the horrors of that first battle. This would be far worse. But the fortress was stronger now, reinforced with men and resources from Winterfell and other northern houses. Perhaps that would be enough. Perhaps not. Duty was all they had. As the front line of whites drew into range, Sandor lifted a torch above his head, the signal to unleash the first volley. Flaming arrows streaked through the darkness, arcing out before plunging into the undead ranks. Great torches fell, leaving trails of sparks. Barrels of burning pitch rained down. The night exploded with flame. Dozens of whites were consumed, shrieking in that ghastly silent lunged way they had. But behind them came 100 more, surging forward, unaffected by fear or pain. The second great battle for the wall began with a thunderous roar. The living poured every ounce of fire and steel they had into the oncoming tide. Within minutes, the courtyard below was a cacophony of clashing steel, screaming men, and the roar of flames. The gates shuddered under massive blows, giants pounding with fists the size of boulders, monstrous shapes ramming themselves against the fortress. The White Walkers unleashed their frigid magic, freezing entire sections of ramparts or blasting men off the wall with shards of ice. Yet this time, there were more defenders to meet them. Knights of the North fought side by side with the Black Brothers, thrusting flaming spears and hackling with axes coated in oil. Wildlings, too, scattered among the ranks, brandishing stolen steel or clubs wrapped in burning rags. Lady Sansa directed supply lines, ensuring fresh barrels of pitch reached the catapults. Garrick and Borand led sorties below, slaying whites that breached the courtyard. Cries of "For Winterfell" mingled with "For the Watch" in a desperate chorus of unity. Sandor himself alternated between commanding from the wall and plunging into the fray where the lines risked breaking. He led a charge against a group of whites that clawed their way over the rubble of an old tower, torch in one hand, Valyrian steel sword in the other, a gift from one of the northern lords who had arrived. He'd never thought to hold such a blade, but now he put it to good use, slicing through undead flesh with an ease that felt almost unnatural. Each time he struck, the steel burned with a faint glow, as though hungry for the undead. Fire was everywhere, a swirling dance of orange and red. He felt its heat, remembered his childhood fear, but harnessed that terror as fuel for his rage. A monstrous shape charged through the gates, a white bear the size of an ox, fermented with ice and blood. It swiped at defenders, sending them flying. Sandor flung his torch, setting the thing's shoulder ablaze, but it only roared, exposing a maw of black gums. A trio of knights rushed forward with spears, while archers loosed flaming arrows into its hide. It staggered, letting out a final shriek before collapsing in flames, thrashing until it was a charred husk. From atop the wall, archers kept up a steady barrage. Some aimed for the White Walkers they glimpsed below, their arrows tipped with dragonglass. Now and then, one found its mark and a walker would shatter in a spray of frost, prompting cheers. But the majority evaded or shielded themselves, orchestrating the battle with glacial calm. Hours dragged on, though it felt like mere minutes lost in the chaos. The defenders grew tired. The undead did not. The living bled, their numbers slowly dwindling. The tide of whites pressed in, climbing over their own fallen, pushing deeper into the courtyard. Flames lit the night like a twisted festival, flickering shadows dancing on the walls. At one point, Sandor found himself face to face with a White Walker. It had slipped into the fortress through a breach in the outer wall, moving with lethal grace. Its eyes glowed like two chips of ice-blue flame. Its sword seemed carved from glass, shimmering with an otherworldly sheen. One slash from that blade could freeze a man's blood in his veins, or so the story said. Sandor raised his Valyrian steel, heart-pounding. The walker struck first, quicker than any human could move. Sandor barely parried, sparks flying where steel met ice. The shock of impact numbed his arms, and frost crackled where the blades touched. For a moment, he locked eyes with the inhuman thing, seeing only malice and centuries-old hunger. He shoved back, launching his own counterattack, aiming for the walker's flank. It slid aside effortlessly, bringing its blade around in a tight arc. Sandor ducked, feeling the chill pass over his head by inches. Frost crystals formed on his hair as if the air itself froze at the walker's command. Gritting his teeth, he swung again. Valyrian steel rang against ice. Tiny shards flew, but the walker's blade didn't shatter. Instead, it hissed something in a language that sounded like cracking ice, then pressed the attack. Sandor stumbled on a corpse beneath his feet, a fallen brother, or possibly a foe, and almost lost his footing. The walker seized the opening, thrusting forward. Sandor barely managed to pivot, taking a glancing blow on the metal plates of his shoulder guard. The force of the strike sent him sprawling, pain exploding in his already wounded shoulder. The walker advanced, raising its sword for the killing blow. Sandor rolled onto his back, bringing his own blade up in desperation. At that moment, a spear tipped with dragon glass hurtled from the side, striking the walker in the ribs. It shrieked, twisting with eerie fluidity to see who had thrown it. Sansa Stark stood there, eyes fierce, another dragonglass spear in hand. She had cast one to save Sandor, and now she readied the second, though her face was pale with fear. The walker hissed, pulling the spear from its body. A crack spread where the obsidian had pierced it, but not enough to end it. Sandor mustered his strength and lunged up from the ground, driving the Valyrian steel blade into that crack, pushing with all his weight. The walker shrieked, a high-pitched wail that made every hair on Sandor's body stand on end. Its form crystallized, fractures spreading outward. Then it exploded into a flurry of icy shards and vapor scattering across the courtyard. Panting, Sandor stayed on one knee, sword still raised in case it reformed. It didn't. Sansa took a shaky step forward, eyes locked on the space where the walker had been. Then she exhaled, relief plain on her face. She reached down to help Sandor up. For an instant, their gazes met, an unlikely alliance forged in terror. He accepted her hand, grunting as he stood. They had no time for words. The battle raged on around them. Together, they pushed forward, rallying men who had faltered at the sight of a walker. Sansa directed them to use their dragonglass weapons to funnel the whites toward areas where the catapults could rain fire. Sandor led small charges to clear pockets of undead. All the while, a swirl of flame and ice defined the night. Little by little, the defenders gained ground. The whites, though numerous, were confronted by a formidable array of fire, steel, and renewed morale. One by one, White Walkers fell to carefully aimed dragonglass arrows or the lethal bite of Valyrian blades. Garrick and Borand, fighting side by side, dispatched another walker at the gate. Harathritos took down a white mammoth with a flaming lance. Men of the North, men of the Watch, wildlings united, they proved more than the undead had bargained for. Eventually, the tide began to shift. Either the White Walkers decided they could not break Castle Black tonight, or some deeper cunning dictated a retreat. The Whites slowed their advance, then turned, stumbling away from the walls in uneven ranks. The Watchers atop the battlements intensified their volleys, raining fiery death as the horde withdrew into the darkness. A ragged cheer went up from the defenders, though it was tinged with caution. They had survived again at great cost. As dawn broke, pale and anemic in the eastern sky, the living stood amid the wreckage of another battle. Corpses littered the courtyard in ghastly piles. Entire sections of the outer wall had collapsed, exposing the yard to the frigid air. The gatehouse was shattered, but the majority of the fortress stood, and enough men still drew breath to call it a victory. In the yard, soldiers slumped to the ground, shedding tears or murmuring prayers of thanks. Wounded cried out. Small groups were already gathering bodies to burn. Sandor leaned against a half-toppled column, heart hammering, his injuries a symphony of pain. Sansa stood beside him, cloak torn, face smudged with soot. Knights hovered protectively nearby, but she looked to Sandor as though he were an equal in this moment of triumph and horror. "We did it," she whispered, voice hoarse. He managed a nod, sweat freezing on his brow. "Aye, for now." Her gaze took in the devastation, the grieving men. "How many more times?" "As many as they try," Sandor said. "Until we beat them, or they kill us all." A silence passed between them, broken only by the crackle of flames from the burning bodies. Then Sansa lifted her chin. "Then we'll stand each time. We have no choice." Her words sounded resolute, and Sandor found himself oddly reassured by them. She had been a frightened girl once, and he a bitter dog. Now, at the edge of the world, they were something else. Protectors, perhaps, in a realm gone mad with ice and death. He pushed off the column, ignoring the agony in his shoulder. "There's work to be done. Let's see to our wounded and ready ourselves. They'll be back." She nodded, squaring her shoulders. "We'll be ready." Together, they moved through the courtyard. organizing rescue efforts, supervising the disposal of corpses, comforting the survivors where they could. Their alliance, born of necessity, seemed stronger with each passing hour. In the days that followed, more reinforcements trickled in from the north, and messages arrived from allies in the Vale, the Riverlands, even a few from across the sea. Small rays of hope in a land shadowed by the undead. Amid the swirling snows and the endless nights, Sandor Clegane continued to lead the Night's Watch, forging a bastion of resistance that served all the living. He was still the Hound, scarred and cynical. Yet in the savage cold he had found a purpose that burned hotter than any flame. Men told tales of how he had stood against the White Walkers, side by side with the Stark of Winterfell, how he had thrown himself into the heart of every battle without flinching. Some claimed that as long as the Hound guarded the wall, the others would never break through. Sandor himself had no time for tales or glory. All he saw was the next dawn, the next battle, the next fragile hope that the living could stand against the creeping darkness. He knew fear of fire, of death, of failing those who depended on him, but he harnessed it, let it sharpen his resolve. Each night, he stood atop the wall and stared out at the polar expanse, waiting for the day he might see the White Walkers vanish for good, or else come again in overwhelming force. Either way, he would not run. His vow bound him now more tightly than any chain. He would guard the realms of men until his last breath, and if the dead came to claim that breath, he would meet them with steel and flame. And so the wall stood, battered but unbroken, beneath a sky of endless winter. And at its edge, the Hound kept watch, a scarred sentinel who had at last found a cause worthy of the scars he bore. The darkness pressed in, but his sword burned bright, a promise that however fierce the shadows, there were still those who would stand and fight, men and women, lords and wildlings, crows and wolves, united by the simple truth that life was worth defending. For as long as Sandor Clegane drew breath, the wall would not fall. In the days that followed the second great assault on Castle Black, the sky remained a blanket of ashen clouds, offering no hint of sun or moon. Snow drifted continuously, sometimes in gentle flurries, sometimes in fierce gales that rattled shutters and lashed at men's faces. Yet life within the castle bustled with urgent purpose. The wounded groaned or slept fitfully in the common hall, their makeshift beds lined up in rows. The smell of boiled herbs and sour poultices lingered in the air. Men in better health passed the hours stacking broken beams for kindling or dragging fresh bodies to the pyres outside the gates. Every day, black smoke rose over the fields, a bitter testament to the cost of survival. Sandor Clegane, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, haunted the ramparts and barracks in restless circuits. His injured shoulder burned with every swing of his arm, but he refused to wear a sling, refused to appear weakened in front of his men. He inspected the newly arrived forces from Winterfell and other northern holdings. He listened to their accounts of more undead sightings along lonely roads or farmland ruins. Every dreadful story sharpened his conviction that, though they had beaten back the others twice, the next wave was coming, and it could be the last if they faltered. At night, he rarely slept more than a few hours. His dreams showed him the giant wight that had battered the wall, the White Walker's sword slicing the air in a blur of cold magic, and the twisted faces of men he'd slain. Sometimes he dreamed of flames devouring everything: castle, men, winter itself. He would awaken in a sweat, his scarred cheek throbbing as though newly burned. Then he would dress, don his black cloak, and climb the wall to stare out at the ice fields. Up there in the howling wind, he found a grim sort of calm, as if balancing on the edge of the world forced him to accept reality. The dead were out there, gathering. He and his allies would stand, or they would perish. Lady Sansa Stark, with her retinue of knights, also worked tirelessly. She organized the stores of grain and salted meat she had brought, ensuring fair rations. She huddled with the maester from her company, Maester Colton, helping him tend to injuries, dispensing words of encouragement. When she moved through the courtyard, men found themselves straightening up, muttering, "My lady," though the courtesy was often awkward. She had learned to command respect with a soft but firm touch, one that complemented Sandor's harsher edge. In quieter moments, she and Sandor spoke in low voices about strategy, about morale, about the illusions of safety. If they disagreed, they did so quietly, away from prying eyes, but more often than not they reached the same conclusion: the realm depended on them to hold this line. New reinforcements trickled in. A small company from House Glover arrived after battling through drifting snowbanks on the King's Road. From the Stormlands came a ragtag band of lesser knights, sent by a distant cousin of House Baratheon who had read the Raven's plea and chosen to risk the journey. The men wore battered plate and carried chipped shields, but they were fighters and they pledged their swords to the wall. A few more wildlings emerged from the woodlands, half dead from cold. These free folk looked at the southern lords with wariness, but found Sandor's blunt, unceremonious leadership easier to stomach. They accepted a share of the stew and a place by the fire. And so the castle's population swelled: crows, wildlings, northern bannermen, wandering knights, criminals who had chosen the black, even a handful of sworn swords from the Vale. They all coexisted within the ancient walls, united by necessity. One morning, just after dawn, Sandor finished checking the watch rotations and found Sansa by the stables, what remained of them. Most of the stable roof was gone, lost to the first battle's flames. Men had patched it with tarps and planks, so a few horses and mules sheltered beneath. The rest of the beasts huddled behind makeshift fences in the courtyard. Sansa was stroking the muzzle of a chestnut mare, murmuring softly. The mare tossed her head, unsettled by the cold. Snow had collected on Sansa's hood, giving her hair a dusting of white. Sandor approached, scowling at the stable's pathetic shape. "We'll need to salvage more wood soon," he said by way of greeting, letting his breath fog in the chilly air. "These beasts will freeze if we don't." Sansa nodded. "We've torn down nearly all the older sheds for lumber. Might have to rip apart the officers' quarters next. They won't like that much." Sandor shrugged. "But better that than losing every horse. We need them for scouting and supply runs." She lifted a hand from the mare to brush snow off her shoulder. "Some of the men wondered if we might relocate the animals to nearby keeps, places that might be intact. But I suspect any keep close enough to matter is in worse shape than we are. Aye. And if the undead come, they'll overrun a small keep easier than this fortress. Like it or not, we have to manage here." He reached out with his good hand to give the mare a perfunctory pat, though he was hardly gentle about it. The horse snorted. "By the way," he added, lowering his voice, "we got word from Eastwatch. They spotted an army of whites marching near the coast, heading inland. They didn't attack Eastwatch directly, but if they move southwest, they could come up behind us." Sansa inhaled sharply. "Then we'd be surrounded if the main host approaches from the north?" He nodded. "Might be their plan. We can't split our forces too much or we weaken the wall. But we might need to send a detachment to deal with that threat." She mulled it over. "We could send one of the more mobile companies, perhaps the knights from the Vale or the Stormlands, who came equipped with horses. You think they can handle a pack of whites on open ground? Better there than waiting for them to link up with the main force." She sighed, clearly torn. "We'll run it by your officers and the northern captains. But something must be done." Sandor gave a grunt. "Meeting at midday, then. Yard Tower, since the common hall is full of wounded." He glanced at her. "You'll be there?" She inclined her head. "Of course." They parted ways, each absorbed by the staggering load of responsibilities. Around them, the courtyard buzzed with activity, men carrying piles of firewood, stewards organizing the day's meager meals, two blacksmiths hammering away in a temporary forge near a chunk of half-collapsed wall. A small group of newly arrived wildlings huddled nearby, passing a skin of strong spirits. When Sandor walked by, they nodded, a hesitant respect that was far cry from the open hostility they once showed to the watch. Survival made strange allies. At midday, a biting wind swept through the yard, rattling loose timbers and snatching away any warmth from the men's cloaks. Sandor gathered the officers, Ser Durin, Garrick, Borand, Hara Three Toes, and the captains from the various northern houses beneath the yard tower, which offered partial shelter from the gale. Sansa attended as well, flanked by a silent knight in battered plate bearing the Stark sigil. A large, crudely drawn map was pinned against the tower's wall, showing the coastline to the east and the paths leading inland to Castle Black. Sandor rapped it with his knuckles. "Eastwatch says a group of whites, maybe a few hundred strong, is heading inland around here." He traced a path that would bring them north of a ridge, then directly behind the wall if they continued. "We have no idea if the White Walkers are with them, but we can't risk letting them close a vice on us." Boren folded his arms across his broad chest. "We can't spare many men, though. If we weaken the castle too much, the main horde might come from the north and crush us." Hara Three Toes, standing off to the side, scratched at his chin. "Take a small force. Quick riders. They cut through the whites from the flank and scatter them. If a walker is among them, we kill it with dragonglass or burn what we can. Then we retreat. No sense trying to hold ground we can't keep." Sansa nodded thoughtfully. "That could work. A swift strike, not a drawn-out battle. The Stormlands knights might be best, they're mounted, used to open fighting. I can send a few of the Vale riders as well." She gave Sandor a quick glance. "But who will lead them?" Ser Durin cleared his throat. "I could volunteer if my Lord Commander wishes." I've seen enough skirmishes in my younger days to hold a cavalry line. Borand narrowed his eyes. And if you ride off to chase them, who commands the gate defenses? You're usually posted there. I can handle that, Garrick chimed in. We have enough men to rotate. Let Ser Durin do this. He's always itching for a chance to show his spurs. Sandor scowled, scanning the group. None of this is about proving anything. It's about results. Ser Durin, if you're confident, you take the riders. Be quick. Harass that pack, burn as many as you can. Don't chase them if they slip away. We can't afford you getting stranded behind enemy lines. Durin bowed his head. Understood, Lord Commander. Sansa looked relieved. I'll have my knights ready by first light tomorrow. We'll supply them with dragonglass-tipped spears, though we have so few left. Sandor nodded. We'll see if the blacksmith can manage more. Until then, we do what we can. They discussed supply details and planned signals in case the cavalry ran into something they couldn't handle, though sending help across the snowfields wouldn't be easy. When the meeting ended, the men dispersed to carry out their tasks, wearing expressions of grim determination. Sansa lingered a moment, rubbing her gloved palms together for warmth. I hate the thought of splitting our forces, she said softly as the others moved away. But we have no choice. He grunted in agreement. Yes. This damned war is all about impossible choices. She studied him, eyes flicking over the lines of exhaustion on his face. And how are you holding up, Lord Commander? She asked, a hint of wryness in her voice. You've hardly slept. I'm fine, he growled, though the dark smudges beneath his eyes betrayed him. Worry about yourself. If the others break through, you'll wish you'd left for Winterfell. She shook her head. I vowed to see this through. Just as you did. Even if the end is uncertain, I can't turn back now. He didn't reply. Something unspoken passed between them, respect or perhaps a shared resignation. Then he gestured with his chin toward the yard. Come on. We've got 1,000 things left to do. That night, preparations for Ser Durin's sortie continued. Riders sharpened their swords and spears, while a steward poured black pitch over a fresh bundle of torches. A few Vale knights tested the weight of newly forged dragonglass daggers, frowning at how easily obsidian could chip if struck against steel. Aim for the vital points, one blacksmith advised. Or the eyes. Don't let them parry it. Beyond these busy knots of men, the rest of Castle Black tried to keep routine. The watchman on the wall scanned the northern horizon for signs of the massive horde, seeing nothing but swirling snow under a pale moon. In the common hall, the wounded moaned and dozed. A handful of cooks ladled out watery stew for those who could still eat. Runa, the wildling woman, kept stirring the pot with quiet diligence, offering a sympathetic ear to any who needed it. She still grieved for the family she had lost, but in that grief she had found a stoic purpose. Sandor walked through the hall around midnight, checking in on the wounded. It was almost too warm there, crowded with bodies and braziers. He saw a boy of perhaps 10, bandaged around the chest, leaning against his mother's shoulder. The mother lifted haunted eyes to Sandor. He fought bravely, she whispered, but they crushed his ribs. Will he? Sandor had no words of comfort. Maester Colton was at the far end of the hall, carefully tending to a man with frostbitten fingers. The boy's prognosis was uncertain at best. We'll do what we can, Sandor muttered, turning away. He hated this part of leadership, witnessing suffering he had no power to stop. He had always believed in the cruelty of the world, but being responsible for these people sharpened the sting of it. He continued on, noticing a cluster of men near the corner, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. As he drew closer, he realized they were cursing the cold, cursing the others, cursing the damnable notion that the living might never prevail. One spat on the floor. We should ride south, the man was saying. Let the dead have the bloody wall. What good's an oath if we die for nothing? Another man shushed him, glancing over his shoulder. But it was too late. Sandor stepped into the light of their lantern. They froze, eyes going wide. There were 5 of them, 2 in tattered cloaks of the watch, one wearing an old northern crest, another a wildling, and a final one who had no insignia. Their expressions ranged from fear to defiance. Sandor's voice was low and even. If you want to run, run, but you'll be on your own out there. The dead won't care that you broke your oath. The man who had spoken swallowed hard, face flushing. Lord Commander, Sandor's scowl deepened, making the scar on his face stand out. Yes, it's bleak. Yes, we might die. But if we turn our backs now, it's not just our death. It's everyone's. All of Westeros becomes a banquet for corpses. He let that sink in, watched them shift uneasily. If you're looking for comfort or assurance, I have none to give. We fight because there's nothing else. If that's too hard for you, you can try running in the night and see how far you get. They said nothing. One of the men dipped his head as if ashamed. Another clutched his worn cloak closer around his shoulders. The wildling among them said quietly, "There's nowhere left to run." Sandor let out a snort. "Then pick up your sword and make the bastards pay. That's all." He turned, cloak swirling behind him, leaving them with their doubts and fears. He had no patience for desertion or despair. Dawn arrived with a storm of wind and sleet. The men in Ser Durin's sortie cursed as they tried to ready their horses. Snow whirled in a sideways gale, stinging eyes and freezing exposed skin. Still, they pressed on, aided by the light of torches and the fact that the wind, brutal though it was, came from the north. If they moved eastward, it would be less of an obstacle. Sandor watched from atop the battered gatehouse as the riders assembled. About 30 strong, mostly knights with good horses, plus a handful of wildling scouts on faster mounts. Ser Durin wore black plate partially concealed by a fur-lined cloak. A plumed helmet rested under his arm, though the plume was already crusted with ice. He spoke to the men in clipped commands, ensuring each had a dragonglass-tipped spear, a decent sword, and enough rations for a few days. The plan was to move swiftly, avoid a pitched battle, and burn or scatter the whites near the coast. Then, if possible, they would circle back to Eastwatch to confirm the area was clear. Lady Sansa approached Sandor at the gatehouse steps, pulling her cloak tight around her. "I worry about them," she admitted. "But it has to be done." He gave a short nod. "Aye. If they succeed, we won't have to worry about an ambush from that direction." His eyes flicked to her. "You've done your part. Don't lose sleep over it." "I doubt I'll sleep at all," she said with a ghost of a smile. "You'll keep the rest of us safe in the meantime?" He snorted. "That's the idea." Then he turned away, descending to speak with Ser Durin before they departed. He offered no grand farewell, just a firm clasp on the knight's arm. "Don't be a fool. Hit them hard and leave. You come back in one piece or not at all." Ser Durin inclined his head. "I'll not fail you, Lord Commander." He mounted his black warhorse, visor snapping due. WN. A swirl of snow obscured them for a moment, and then the gate was drawn open. The riders trotted out, disappearing into the white gloom. One by one, the watchers on the walls silently prayed to their various gods for success. The day wore on in a relentless assault of wind. Work crews braved the courtyard to reinforce weakened sections of the walls with timber. Others found rope and built new scaffolds to replace those destroyed in the last battle. The forging of arrowheads and steel tips never ceased. From time to time, a raven soared overhead, though the swirling gusts often knocked them off course. Still, a few messages arrived from other northern outposts, grim tidings of roving whites, small packs of corpses picking off travelers. None of those groups approached the scale of the host that had clashed with Castle Black, suggesting the others might be spread out in the wilderness, biding their time. That evening, Sansa joined Sandor and a handful of the Night's Watch officers for a sparse meal in the corner of the old Lord Commander's hall. The space was cramped because half the hall had been converted into storage for the newly arrived supplies, barrels of dried beans, salted pork, and smaller casks of mead. A single torch burned on the table, casting dancing shadows. Garrick picked at a chunk of bread, looking exhausted. Boren quietly spooned up stew, his eyes distant. Ser Durin was gone, of course, leading the sortie. Harathritos was out with a scouting party near the forest's edge. It seemed all the best fighters were scattered, forced by circumstance to cover every vulnerable point. Sandor tore off a piece of bread, chewing without much appetite. The stew was watery again, no fresh meat left. Sansa tried to coax conversation. "If Ser Durin succeeds, we might have time to plan the next step. Should we send ravens to the Riverlands? Or attempt to contact any houses left in the Westerlands for reinforcements?" Boren grumbled. "We've tried. Either they're dealing with bandits and winter themselves, or they don't believe the threat is real. We get polite refusals or no reply at all." Sansa pressed her lips together. If only they could see with their own eyes. But the roads are impassable. Winter is the best ally the others have. Garrick snorted. "Aye, winter and corpses. Some ally." He glanced at Sandor. "Lord Commander, you think we'll get out of this alive?" Sandor finished the last of his bread and dropped the crust on the table. "Do you want pretty lies or the truth?" Garrick sighed. "Truth. We fight, we bleed, and maybe we buy the realm time. Maybe if we hold long enough, more people join our side. Maybe something else shifts the balance. But we don't have the numbers to fight the others in open war. If they come again in full force, we stand or die here. He pushed away his bowl, appetite gone. That's all. A silence followed, thick with unspoken fear. Finally, Sansa let out a quiet breath. Then we should be grateful for every dawn we see. She managed a small, sad smile. And keep preparing. The group dispersed soon after. Outside, the wind was still shrieking, but the night sky offered a glimpse of moonlight through ragged clouds. Sandor parted from the others and returned to his room. He pushed open the creaking door and found the interior as cold as the corridor. No fire burned in the brazier. He spat a curse, then fumbled for flint to spark a small flame. Soon enough, a weak glow lit the cramped space, illuminating a battered wooden desk and the rough bed where he seldom slept. Stacks of reports cluttered the desk. Men had scribbled down sightings of the dead, lists of casualties, tallies of rations. Leadership might be new to him, but he took it seriously in his own begrudging way. He scanned a few lines, rubbed at his temples, then gave up. The day had sapped his will. He tossed his cloak on a chair and dropped heavily on the bed, boots still on, hoping for a few hours of oblivion. As he drifted, memories intruded. The roaring flames during the first battle, the shriek of that White Walker when he drove Valyrian steel into its chest, Sansa Stark's eyes steady as she hurled a dragonglass spear. The weight of it all pressed on him like a physical burden. He forced his eyes shut, telling himself there would be time for guilt or reflection after the war was done, if any of them lived. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under. Morning came in a haze of gunmetal gray. He stirred to the sound of someone knocking urgently on his door. The brazier had burned out, leaving the room frigid. "What?" he growled, sitting up stiffly, a muffled voice. "Lord Commander, there's a man at the gate, one of Ser Durin's riders back already. Says it's urgent." He felt a jolt, adrenaline cutting through the remnants of sleep. "I'm coming." He yanked on his cloak, splashed his face with the last bit of water in a basin, then stalked out. His shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it, descending to the courtyard. The wind had died down for the moment, leaving the air painfully still and cold. Near the gate stood a lone rider, his horse lathered in sweat despite the cold. The man clutched the reins, gasping for breath, while a steward tried to help him dismount. Sandor recognized him as a Stormlands knight, young and wiry, with haunted eyes. One side of his armor was dented, and dried blood streaked the metal. Sandor reached him in a few strides. "Report," he snapped. The knight bowed his head. "My lord, we found the whites near the coast. More than we counted. We rode in, burned some, scattered them at first. But then more came. Too many. There was a White Walker, maybe two. Ser Durin. The man swallowed hard. He ordered us to break off, but the whites closed in. We lost so many. A handful of us escaped, but were scattered. Ser Durin was still fighting when I last saw him, along with a few who stayed. I think they're lost." Sandor's jaw clenched. "How many whites did you see?" "Hundreds, maybe more. They had beasts with them, monstrous wolves or dire creatures. We tried to ride around, but they appeared from all sides. We never stood a chance." The gathered onlookers muttered in alarm, some turning away. Sandor ground his teeth, forcibly calming himself before addressing the knight. "You did what you could. Get inside, rest, see the maester. We'll search for survivors later." The knight's shoulders sagged in relief as he allowed the steward to help him toward the hall. Sandor turned, letting out a bitter curse. Ser Durin's mission had failed, or at least met fierce resistance. The possibility remained that Durin and a few others still fought or had found another route back, but he couldn't plan on it. That left the castle short of the men and horses they had gambled on, and it meant that pack of whites near the coast might be larger and more organized than feared. Lady Sansa arrived, cloak hurriedly thrown over a plain gown. "I heard. Is Ser Durin?" Sandor gave a curt shake of his head. "Don't know. Likely dead or captured. Either way, the sortie didn't succeed." Her face tightened. "So that threat remains." "Aye, and we've lost men to no gain." He dragged a hand over his beard, frustration clear. "Damn it all. We can't keep sending men off to be devoured." She took a deep breath. "Then we focus on the wall. The others can circle around, but if the fortress doesn't fall, they can't pass easily into the rest of Westeros. Perhaps that still counts for something. He wanted to snap a harsh reply, something about how the others could cross the frozen seas or climb the mountains. But he saw no point in frightening her further. We hold the wall, he agreed. Let the realm rely on that. No more outriders left the castle that day. Instead, they consolidated. Garrick led efforts to strengthen the battered gatehouse using every plank and scrap of iron. Borand organized the archers to ensure each vantage point had a supply of flaming arrows. The wildlings erected new watchfires along the top of the wall despite the punishing wind. Harathrios returned near dusk, reporting a faint glow in the far north like ice reflecting starlight. Could be the White Walkers, he said grimly, rallying for another push. And so the Watchers braced for a renewed assault that never came that night. When dawn broke, they found themselves still alone behind the walls. A frigid calm settled, heightening everyone's tension. Men snapped at each other over small slights. Some drank too much mead, trying to quell their fears. Tempers flared. Another day passed, more snowfall drifted in, and still no horde appeared. Sansa ventured to the top of the wall late one afternoon, wishing to see for herself. She wore furs upon furs, her cheeks reddened by the cold. 2 knights accompanied her, though they were ill at ease on the high parapets where ice slicked the footing. Sandor joined them, guiding her to a relatively safe vantage. From there, they saw a great white emptiness stretching in all directions, broken only by scattered lumps that might be drifts or the remains of old camps. The sky above was pale, the sun a faint disk behind a veil of clouds. She gazed out for a long time. So quiet, she murmured, hugging her cloak closer. When they come, it's like the world itself howls with them. But between assaults, it feels empty. He stared at the distant horizon where swirling snow met the bruised sky. They're out there, he said, hiding among the wastes. Could be a day, a week. Then they'll strike. She shivered. I know. But the waiting is its own torture. War isn't just about the battle. It's about the dread before it. He paused. That's something I learned long ago. She turned her head, studying his scarred profile. You've fought in so many battles. Does it ever get easier? He gave a bitter half-laugh. Easier? No. But maybe you learn to live with it. Know your role, do your duty, accept that the next hour might be your last. She absorbed that in silence, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said at length, though he wasn't sure if it was pity or genuine empathy. He wasn't certain he wanted either. They stayed a while longer, saying little. Then she left, escorted by her knights, the wind stealing fragments of her soft voice as she descended. Sandor remained, scanning the horizon until the light began to fail. The cold burrowed into his bones, but he ignored it. Something in him refused to abandon this watch, as if by staring into the distance he could will the others to appear. But they did not. When the evening bell tolled, he returned to the courtyard. Garrick and Borand updated him on repairs, supply inventories, and new arrivals. A handful of men from White Harbor had come, half-frozen, claiming Lord Manderley might send more if the roads cleared. Another raven arrived from a southern lord, politely refusing to send troops due to trouble in his own domain. Sandor cursed and tossed the letter aside. The realm's petty concerns seemed ridiculous when faced with the threat of oblivion. That night, he took a short rest, half-dozing by the dying brazier in his chamber. When a new day dawned, he resumed his vigilance. So it went for several days, a tense stalemate. Men speculated that the others had withdrawn or that some hidden force kept them at bay. But Sandor dismissed such talk. The undead didn't know fear or politics. They moved when it suited them, and the living's ignorance meant danger was close. On the 5th day since Ser Duran's sortie had vanished, watchers spied a single figure approaching from the north, staggering across the snow. At first, they assumed it was a lost traveler or a wight. Crossbows were trained on it, men on the wall calling out warnings. But as it drew near, they saw it was a living person, cloaked in black. The figure stumbled, fell, then crawled the last few yards before slumping. A rescue party hurried out, hauling the unconscious form inside. When they pulled back the hood, they discovered an older man from the Night's Watch, face pale and nearly frostbitten. He had been part of Duran's company. Immediately, they summoned Sandor and Sansa. By the time Sandor reached the spot, the man was lying on a bench in the common hall, trembling violently as stewards rubbed his limbs to restore circulation. Maester Colton knelt by him, pressing a cup of hot broth to his lips. The man managed a few sips before coughing. His eyes flickered open, panicked, until he recognized the black cloaks around him. Sandor crouched, ignoring the throbbing in his own shoulder. Easy, he muttered. You're safe. You were with Ser Duran's group, right? What happened? The man's gaze darted around as if expecting whites to leap from the shadows. Sansa stood behind Sandor, silent and watchful. Finally, the man's voice emerged in a ragged croak. "We were overrun. Most of us died or fled. I got separated in a storm. Been wandering for days. The whites there, so many." Leading them was a white walker on a dead stag, a stag the size of a horse, eyes burning blue. "It cut down half our riders." He shuddered at the memory. "Ser Durnfell, I'm sure of it. I saw him, he was fighting, then that walker struck him. The ice spread over his armor. He screamed." The man's eyes squeezed shut. Sansa's hands clenched in her cloak. Sandor inhaled sharply, cursing under his breath. "So they're still out there," he said after a moment. "And stronger than ever." The man nodded, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lord Commander," he whispered. "I tried." Sandor placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, gentler than one might expect. "You survived. That counts. Rest now." Maester Colton eased him back, continuing to rub warmth into the man's limbs. Sansa met Sandor's gaze. "It seems we have confirmation," she said quietly. "The others have monstrous mounts now?" He exhaled. "First we saw undead bears, giants, mammoths. Now stags. Maybe they'll raise every beast in the north if they can. No wonder they're unstoppable." She lowered her eyes. "We keep the gates barred and the fires lit. The next assault might break us if we're not prepared." He nodded grimly. "We'll do everything we can." As the battered watch member slipped into unconsciousness, Sandor turned to Garrick, who had come up behind them. "Double the archers tonight. Keep half on the wall, half in the courtyard. And spread the word if they attack, it might come from any direction. They have beasts that can scale or break through. We make no assumptions about their tactics." Garrick saluted, face pale. "Aye, Lord Commander." Word spread through the castle like wildfire. Ser Durin confirmed dead, the others still gathering forces near the coast, and white walkers riding undead stags. Morale plummeted. Even the bravest men looked anxious, their eyes darting to the horizon as if expecting an onslaught at any moment. Sansa spent the day moving among them, offering encouragement. She praised those who had worked hardest on the repairs, comforted the wounded, and tried to inspire unity. Yet there were men who could not be consoled, who muttered about doom and shuffled away to brood. That night, the wind picked up, howling around the ramparts. Firelight glowed from countless torches on the wall. Men perched with crossbows, faces half frozen in the chill. In the courtyard, archers paced with drawn bows, scanning every corner. Barrels of pitch stood ready to be lit and hurled. The entire fortress was a coiled spring, primed to unleash fury. But hour after hour passed and no enemy arrived. Dawn revealed the same weary watchers, a fresh layer of snow on their shoulders. Some blinked in bleary disbelief that they had stood guard all night for nothing. But Sandor knew better. The others had no need to arrive at a convenient time. They could wear down the defenders through sleepless fear alone. 2 days later, around midday, the horns sounded from atop the wall, 2 blasts, then 3. A wave of panic surged through Castle Black as men scrambled to their posts. Sandor raced to the ramparts, heart hammering. He knew the code: 1 blast for returning rangers, 2 for wildlings, 3 for white walkers. The horns had rung out in a confusing pattern as if the watchers themselves were unsure what they saw. Once at the top, he peered over the edge, fighting the gusts of wind. Far in the distance, along the plain of snow, he saw an approaching group. They were not a huge army, nor did they move in the shambling gait of whites. Instead, they marched in formation, a column of around 50 men. Some wore black, some wore furs, and at their head flew a flag, a direwolf banner. Sandor narrowed his eyes. Sansa's men? Or more from Winterfell? He couldn't be certain, but it seemed they were alive, not dead. The watchers around him hesitated, crossbows poised. "Hold," Sandor shouted. "Let them approach. If they're living, we'll see soon enough." They waited tensely as the column drew closer, finally halting within shouting distance. A voice called up from below, echoing, "We come from Winterfell. Open your gates, Lady Arya Stark and her companions request entry." Sandor stiffened. Arya Stark? She had once been the fierce child he'd roamed the war-torn countryside with, an unintended traveling companion. He believed her lost to the chaos of Westeros, or perhaps long returned to her family. The notion that she was here, leading men from Winterfell, jolted him with a shock he couldn't name. He gave orders for the gates to be opened, but with caution. Archers remained at the ready, and flames crackled in the pitch barrels in case of treachery. The portcullis rattled upward, revealing a group that entered slowly, shields raised as a precaution. At the front rode a slight figure on a black horse, wrapped in heavy furs, hood drawn. To this figure's right was a taller man in black leathers, eyes sweeping the courtyard. Another half-dozen men on foot formed an honor guard, many wearing the Stark sigil. Sandor descended, meeting them in the courtyard. Sansa stood beside him, breath catching in her throat. The hooded rider dismounted in one smooth motion. The watchers parted, letting her step forward. She pushed back her hood, revealing a face etched with lines of determination, gray eyes sharp beneath dark eyebrows. Arya Stark had grown from a child into a steeled young woman, scars faint on her cheek, hair shorn to a practical length. She regarded the courtyard with a level stare, as though ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. But when she saw Sansa, her expression warmed, just a fraction. "Sansa," she said, voice low and steady. "Arya." Tears glistened in Sansa's eyes, though her composure remained. She stepped forward, and Arya gripped her in a fierce embrace, the sisters clinging to each other in the swirling snow. Soldiers around them relaxed slightly, though everyone remained mindful of the dangers. After a moment, they parted. Arya's gaze shifted to Sandor. Recognition flashed in her eyes, along with 1,000 unspoken emotions. She had last seen him under very different circumstances. For a beat, they just looked at each other. Then Arya inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement. Clegane. He didn't quite know what to say. The last time they'd been together, she'd left him wounded on a hillside, refusing to grant him a mercy killing. He'd assumed she hated him for everything he'd done. Perhaps she still did. But she had come a long way from the child who had once threatened to stab him in his sleep. "You're alive," he said, his tone rough. She studied his scarred face, the black cloak of the Watch. "So are you. And you're Lord Commander." He shrugged. Someone had to do it." An awkward silence stretched. Sansa cleared her throat, stepping between them. "Arya, you came with men from Winterfell? We weren't expecting you." Arya's expression sobered. "I've been ranging with some of our best fighters, dealing with stray whites near the Wolfswood. Then news reached us that the others have been attacking the wall, so we marched north as quickly as we could. We heard you were here, leading the defense." Sansa nodded, glancing at the men behind her sister. "Your numbers look small. Are these all who came? We're the vanguard. More are behind us, though not many. Winterfell has been fortified, but we can spare only so many." Arya's gaze traveled across the blackened buildings, the half-rebuilt walls. "It looks like you've been through hell." Sansa's lips pressed tight. "We have. Twice. We're still expecting another onslaught." Arya's jaw tightened. "Then we'll stand with you." She gestured to her companions, who stepped forward, pulling back hoods to reveal grim faces. "This is Gendry, a master smith and warrior. He's been forging steel in Winterfell for months now." A broad-shouldered man with a stubbled jaw nodded curtly. "And here's Hallis Malin of my father's old retinue. Others as well. Good men, determined to see the others stopped." Sandor took in the newcomers. Gendry's arms were corded with muscle and a warhammer hung from his belt, a nod to his Baratheon blood if rumor was correct. Hallis Malin wore the Stark insignia with pride, scanning the courtyard as though searching for threats. A mix of northern spearmen and archers, perhaps 50 strong, took up positions behind them, awaiting orders. "Welcome to Castle Black," Sandor said tersely, feeling the weight of leadership. "We can use every blade. We've got whites to the north, more along the coast, and white walkers commanding them. If you're here to fight, then get your men settled and we'll talk strategy." Arya's eyebrows rose slightly at his brusque manner, but she only nodded. "We're here to fight. And if you have any forges or a place Gendry can set up, we'll make more weapons. We've been working with dragonglass, forging arrowheads, too. Brought some with us." Sansa looked genuinely relieved. "That's wonderful. We're desperate for more dragonglass arms. Our supply is painfully low." Gendry hefted a satchel from his shoulder, the clink of obsidian muffled by cloth. "We gathered as much as we could from around Dragonstone with the help of a few others. It's not a vast amount, but it should help." Sandor felt a grim satisfaction. "Good. Set him up in the smithy. Though it's half-ruined, you'll find space enough to work. We'll get you coals and iron for the forging." He glanced at the Stark sisters. "You two catch up. I've got to see about quarters for your men." Arya turned to Sansa. "I have missed you," she murmured, the steel in her voice giving way to a younger softness. Sansa blinked back tears, hugging her again. The watchers around them shifted, some smiling. Even in this bleak place, the reunion of family brought a spark of hope. Not for the first time, Sandor was struck by how much these girls, no, these women, had endured, how they had grown from the frightened daughters of a beheaded lord into leaders in their own right. Leaving them to talk, he stomped away, barking orders at the stewards to find space in one of the larger towers. Men hurried to obey, leading Arya's company inside. Gendry followed, scanning the fortress with a critical eye, muttering about the sorry state of the walls. Sandor gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement before continuing his rounds. As darkness fell, Castle Black felt strangely more alive. Another small band of allies had arrived, morale lifted by the presence of someone who carried the Stark name with the same fierce spirit as Sansa. Men whispered that if the young wolf girl was here, maybe it was a sign the tide could turn. The others might not be unstoppable after all. Rumors spread, some said Arya had trained with assassins across the sea, that she had magical powers, or that she could slay a white with a single dagger thrust. Exaggerations, no doubt, but they fueled hope. The next day, the wind eased for once, allowing a lull in the snow. Arya and Sansa joined Sandor for a council of war with Garrick, Borand, Harathritos, and the other leaders. The battered map was unrolled again, lines marking recent sightings of undead. Arya traced her finger along the coast. We encountered whites here too, near Breakwater Bay. The storm slowed them, but they're definitely looking for a route inland. Sandor grunted. We lost a sortie to that group. They're still out there, bigger than we thought. We have to hold the wall in case they link up with the main host from the north. Garrick spoke up. We've been reinforcing the main gate, but if they come in massive numbers or with those giant beasts, we're not sure it'll hold. We can only do so much with broken timbers. Borand rapped the table. Could we meet them in the field before they reach us? If we had enough cavalry. Arya cut in, voice tight. We tried that approach near the Wolfswood. The whites' numbers grow faster than you think. They can encircle you. Unless you have overwhelming strength, the risk is too great. Sansa frowned at the map. Then we rely on the wall again. It's worked so far. She paused, looking at Sandor. Though it's cost us dearly every time. He nodded, jaw clenched. Yes, but it's still our best defense. We keep archers and catapults ready, more dragonglass if Gendry can forge it. When they come, we greet them with fire. Harathritos tapped a scarred finger on the map. Fire's good for whites, but what about White Walkers? Dragonglass and Valyrian steel are our only real hope. Arya's gaze flicked to Sandor's sword, the Valyrian steel blade she'd seen him wield. You have one. I have a dagger from my time in Winterfell. The small, but made of Valyrian steel. Gendry's forging arrowheads with dragonglass. If we aim carefully, maybe we can take out the walkers. Borand sighed. That's a lot of maybe. But I suppose that's what we have. They debated tactics for another hour, concluding that the best course was to stay vigilant, keep repairing the fortress, and coordinate archers armed with dragonglass arrows for when the others attacked. They would also send a small scouting group to the north to glean early warning if the horde advanced. Arya volunteered for that mission, wanting to see the territory firsthand, but Sansa objected fiercely. You just arrived. You're exhausted. Let someone else go. Her voice trembled with worry. I can't lose you again. Arya's face softened, but she shook her head. This is what I'm good at. I'll take a few men, be in and out before they know. We need eyes out there. Sandor assessed Arya. He remembered her as a child with more courage than sense, but the woman before him radiated a quiet confidence, honed by hardships he could only guess at. Fine, he said eventually, but don't stray too far. We can't rescue you if the undead corner you. She smirked a little. I've been cornered before, Clegane. Doesn't often end well for my enemies. Sansa still looked distressed, but she relented. Be careful, please. That evening, Arya and a small party of 6, 2 Northerners, 2 Wildlings, and 2 Watch Rangers, slipped out of Castle Black, heading north on foot to avoid drawing attention. They carried mostly light gear, ropes, and short bows with dragonglass-tipped arrows. Sandor watched them vanish into the twilight, his mind churning with misgivings. This was the sister of the woman who had fought beside him against the walkers, the same girl he'd once known as a biting, sharp-tongued child. Fate played cruel jokes, reuniting them now at the edge of the world, threatened by nightmares. During the next few days, the castle continued its pattern of relentless labor. Gendry hammered away in the forge, shaping arrowheads and spear tips from the obsidian shards. His brow shone with sweat despite the cold, and black soot streaked his muscled arms. Whenever he emerged for food or air, men flocked around him, desperate to see how many new weapons he'd finished. A meager trickle of new arrivals continued to show up. A handful of men from the mountains near the Eyrie, another group of wildlings who had fled white attacks in the deeper forests. Each face looked more worn than the last, carrying tales of slaughter and despair. Yet they came because Castle Black was the last stronghold standing between the others and the rest of the realm. Sansa, for her part, spent her days in a blur of administration, checking on supply stocks, visiting the wounded, comforting them with quiet words and a gentle hand. More than once, Sandor passed her in the halls, exchanging a curt nod. There was no time for small talk, but he recognized her value in keeping the men's spirits afloat. He had never been good at kindness. He led by fierce example, by intimidation when necessary. She complimented him by offering hope. Perhaps that was why the men murmured that the Hound and the lady made an unlikely but formidable pair. Fire and ice, grit and grace. A full week passed without Arya's return. Worry gnawed at Sansa's heart, and though she never said it out loud, Sandor could see the tension in her face. Another day dragged by, still no sign. Then, just as the Watchers were beginning to fear the worst, a horn blew 3 times from atop the wall, an alarm for White Walkers. The fortress erupted into motion, men scrambling for arms, yelling for torches. Sandor bounded up the stairs, cold dread seizing him. Was the horde here? At the top, he found Garrick manning a spyglass, scanning the horizon. "Lord Commander," Garrick gasped, eyes wide. "Something's moving out there. Looks like people running. Whites behind them." Sandor peered into the distance, though the swirl of snow made it difficult to see. At last, he made out a small cluster of figures, maybe 4 or 5, sprinting across the plain. Behind them, dozens of shapes lurched in pursuit. Every so often, a figure stopped, loosed an arrow, then kept running. Sandor's heart lurched. That had to be Arya's scouting party, or what remained of it. "Open the gates enough to let them through," he barked. "Archers at the ready to cover them. Catapults with flaming barrels if we can. Hurry!" Below, men rushed to comply. The gates creaked open just a sliver, enough for a group to slip inside if they reached it in time. On the wall, archers notched arrows, lighting them from nearby braziers. The Watchers waited until the cluster of fleeing figures drew closer, the Whites right behind. Sandor bellowed, "Loose!" and a rain of flaming arrows fell. Some Whites caught fire and stumbled, while others pushed on. The runners weaved, nearly tripping over corpses and ice. At last, they came near enough for Sandor to see Arya among them. Her hair whipping in the wind, face set in fierce concentration, a dragonglass arrow knocked in her bow. Another figure was Gendry, who must have come out looking for her or met her in the field, though no one had mentioned he'd left. They sprinted toward the gate, Whites mere yards behind. Another volley of arrows hissed down. Sandor shouted for the pitch barrels. One crashed onto the snow, flames roaring up to form a barrier. The Whites recoiled slightly, but not enough to stop them. Arya and Gendry leaped the flames at a gap, the other 3 men following in panic. The Watchers hammered frantically on the mechanism to pull the gate wide enough for them. Arya ducked inside first, dragging a wounded wildling by the arm. Gendry covered them, swinging a heavy hammer to smash the skull of a White that got too close. Finally, all 5 survivors tumbled into the courtyard, collapsing as the gate slammed shut behind them. A roar of frustration came from the Whites outside. Many pounded on the walls with skeletal hands, while archers rained more fire from above. A few Whites tried climbing, only to be met with boiling oil. Within minutes, the attack faltered. The undead, lacking direct orders from a walker, eventually drifted back into the white gloom, leaving smoldering remains at the base of the gate. In the courtyard, men rushed to help the newly returned. Arya knelt on the frozen ground, panting, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Gendry stood guard beside her, chest heaving as he gripped his hammer. Of the other 3, 2 were clearly injured, one with a gash across the chest, another limping. They looked half dead from exhaustion. Sandor pushed through the crowd, kneeling by Arya's side. "Are you all right?" he demanded. She looked up, eyes still bright with adrenaline. We saw them, the horde. So many whites, White Walkers, some new abominations. We tried to get back earlier, but the storms, she broke off, breathing raggedly. We lost men out there, but Gendry found us halfway. He helped us fight free. Gendry gave a curt nod, wiping blood from his cheek. She signaled for help with a flare arrow, so I took a few men left at night to find them. We were ambushed just outside the tree line. This is all that's left of us. Sandor's gaze flicked over the battered survivors. You saw the main horde? Where? Arya swallowed. Northeast of here, maybe 2 days' march. They're moving slowly, but there were hundreds, thousands maybe. Many White Walkers. They had these icy creatures shaped like spiders, bigger than hounds. Some mutated direwolves. And they were heading toward us, or near enough. They'll be here soon. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold settled into Sandor's bones. Thousands. He hauled Arya to her feet with a gentler grip than he usually displayed. Get inside, get warm. You did well to come back. We'll handle the rest. As men helped the wounded away, Sansa arrived, breathless, a cloak half thrown over her shoulders. Seeing Arya, she hurried forward, relief flooding her features. Arya? She wrapped her arms around her sister, ignoring the blood and grime. Arya sank into the embrace, trembling with the aftershock of terror and exhaustion. A hush fell on the courtyard as onlookers realized how close they'd come to losing more of their own. Sandor let them have their moment, then spoke up, voice carrying across the yard. You heard her. The others marched this way. We have only a short time to prepare. He turned to Garrick, who stood nearby, ashen-faced. Sound the alarm. Gather every fighter, every volunteer. We man the walls now. No more half measures. Garrick bowed his head. I, Lord Commander. Sansa supported Arya, who was leaning on her. How long do we have, as she asked, voice quavering. Not long, Arya murmured. A day, maybe 2, if we're lucky. Sandor's eyes flicked to the gate, where the whites had retreated but not vanished. Then we make every minute count. This will be the biggest assault yet. He exhaled, the raw cold stinging his lungs. We'll hold them, or we'll die trying. Across Castle Black, a grim fury sparked. Horns blew, men sprinted to don armor, to gather bows and spears. Women and non-combatants scurried to move supplies or tend to the wounded. Gendry returned to the forge despite his own bruises, hammering out more obsidian points with frantic speed. The Stark sisters offered their leadership, Sansa rallying the defenders, Arya double-checking vantage points and distributing dragon glass to archers. The wildlings formed hunting squads to patrol the perimeter, ensuring no smaller groups of whites snuck in. Atop the wall, watchers installed fresh torches and barrels, determined not to be caught off guard. Sandor threw himself into the preparations, ignoring the protests of his aching shoulder. He oversaw the gate defenses, ensuring every beam was reinforced, every crack sealed. He inspected the catapults, cursing at any sign of disrepair. Fear was a bitter taste in his mouth, but he channeled it into action. If these were the final days, he intended to make them count. Better to face death with a sword in hand than cower. Night fell, and the watch remained at full readiness. No attack came, but many men claimed to hear distant howls on the wind, an eerie chorus from the north. The morning dawned leaden, sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Everyone's nerves were stretched taut. Where was the horde? Had they slowed or changed direction? By midday, the horns blared again, 3 long blasts from the top of the wall. This time, there was no confusion. White Walkers had been sighted on the horizon, an immense swarm of whites in their wake. The watchers peered northward, hearts pounding as a living darkness spread across the plain. Thousands of figures, shrouded in swirling snow, marched inexorably toward the wall. Now and then, a flash of pale light indicated a White Walker among the ranks or some monstrous creature that defied description. Men along the ramparts lit their arrows and knocked them, faces grim. Catapult crews heaved barrels into place, torches at the ready. Sansa and Arya stood together near the main courtyard, each armed with a Valyrian steel blade. Sansa had borrowed a longsword from a northern knight, while Arya clutched her dagger. Gendry paced by the smithy, keeping a supply of newly forged dragon glass weapons within reach. Garrick, Borand, Hara Three-Toes, and every capable fighter formed ranks behind the walls and at the gate. A hush fell as though the storm itself held its breath. Sandor stood atop the gatehouse, scanning the monstrous host with narrowed eyes. Giants lumbered among the throng, their flesh half-rotted. Horrific spider-like beasts skittered near the flanks, each the size of a small horse, limbs dripping ice. Packs of undead wolves prowled ahead, glowing eyes fixed on the fortress. And scattered throughout were the White Walkers, tall and slender, their armor of frozen fractals glinting in the gray light. One rode a massive stag white, its antlers rimed with frost. Another guided a giant from its perch on the creature's shoulder. The scene felt like a painting of nightmares come to life. Sandor swallowed hard. This was it. The final stand or something close to it. He raised his sword in a silent command, then roared, "Archers, draw." A wave of tension coursed through the ramparts. The undead horde drew nearer, the swirling snow parting around them as though bowing to their presence. No heartbeat hammered louder than the watchers. Then, just as they came into range, Sandor dropped his sword. Loose. A storm of flaming arrows rained down, hissing into the ranks of wights. Some collapsed in flames, but others kept coming, climbing over burning corpses without a second glance. The watchers notched again, released another volley, trying to kill as many as they could before the enemy reached the walls. Catapults launched barrels of burning pitch, splattering fire across the field, igniting dozens of wights at a time. The smell of burning flesh thickened the air. But still they advanced, unstoppable. The giants let out deep, echoing roars, smashing aside wights that got in their way. The monstrous spiders scuttled around flaming patches, some climbing over the carcasses of lesser creatures. White walkers strode calmly, each step laced with ancient, unholy power. One raised a slender blade, pointed it at the wall, and a gust of freezing wind blasted upward, extinguishing torches and freezing men's hands to their bows if they weren't quick to drop them. Cries of agony rang out. Sandor snarled, ordering more torches lit, more barrels thrown. Every man who could still move obeyed, battling the creeping cold. Then the horde reached the base of the wall, smashing into it like a black tide. Wights clawed at the ice, some trying to climb, others hammering at the gate. Giants roared, pounding fists or clubs. Spiders scrabbled up the rough patches, forcing defenders to lean over the ramparts and hurl flaming oil directly onto them. The entire fortress shook with the force of the impact. Men shouted in a chaotic chorus, "Keep them off! More oil! Archers, fire at will!" Sandor darted along the walkway, sword in one hand, torch in the other, slicing through any wight that managed to scramble atop. A chunk of ice from a giant's blow cascaded near him, nearly knocking him off balance. Below, the gate groaned as undead battered it. He could see cracks forming along the hinges. Garrick led a team of defenders to brace it with beams. A giant hammered again, forcing the beams to buckle. "Catapults, focus on that giant." Sandor roared. 2 catapults launched flaming pots, striking the giant's shoulders. It bellowed, staggering, but a white walker behind it raised a hand, freezing the flames. The giant lurched forward again. Despair gnawed at the defenders. Near the southwestern corner, Sansa and Arya directed a squad of archers armed with dragoglass arrows. They targeted the white walkers they could see, letting fly. Now and then a direct hit shattered a walker in a burst of ice crystals. Each kill rallied the defenders, prompting cheers. But there were more of those pale fiends scattered throughout the host, each guiding pockets of wights. One walker astride the stag galloped along the wall's perimeter, blasting freezing winds that knocked men from the ramparts or iced up entire sections of walkway. Fire wars with ice, the battle uncertain. Hours seemed to pass in a maelstrom of noise and fear. The defenders fought with every ounce of strength, drenching the wights in flame, hacking them apart. Gendry moved from station to station, ferrying fresh obsidian blades. Harathritos led a wildling charge inside the courtyard to fend off wights that burst through a collapsed sallyport. Garrick and Boren tried to hold the gate. Sandor lost count of how many creatures he killed, his sword arm burning, the reek of death in his nostrils. Yet more kept coming, as if the entire north had risen from its grave. Then, with a splintering crash, the main gate buckled. Wood shards flew, beams snapping. A giant's arm punched through, clearing a path for wights to pour in. Garrick's team fell back, forming a desperate shield wall. Dozens of wights flooded the courtyard, hissing and clawing. Sansa, Arya, and their archers pivoted, sending arrows into the mass. Sandor cursed, leaping down the steps into the yard to join the melee. Fire from torches and pitch lit the night, casting frantic shadows across the blood-stained snow. Chaos reigned. Men screamed as wights tore into them. White Walker magic froze entire squads in an instant. The giant that broke the gate lumbered forward, swinging a club made from a tree trunk. Sandor dodged, rolling behind rubble, then sprang up to slash at the giant's leg with Valyrian steel. The blade bit deep, blackened blood oozing forth. The giant howled, but only stumbled. Another blow from its club sent men sprawling. Arya wove through the courtyard, dagger flashing, hamstringing wights with quick cuts. Gendry hammered a spider-like creature until it shattered. Hara's spear impaled a wolf-wight that lunged at Sansa's back. The entire fortress devolved into pitched, up-close battle, the defenders severely outnumbered. Flames illuminated swirling snow, painting a scene of unholy carnage. Sandor found himself face to face with another White Walker, its sword a shard of ice. He blocked a slash, feeling the cold jolt up his arm. He countered, but the walker parried with unnatural speed. Frost crackled at the point of contact, and Sandor's breath hissed through clenched teeth. Another slash, another parry. He recognized that this one was stronger, faster. He needed help. As if answering a silent call, Arya appeared at the walker's flank, dagger in hand. She lunged for its side. The walker twisted, batting her away with a blow that knocked her to the ground. Its attention wavered for an instant, enough for Sandor to bring his Valyrian steel blade down on its shoulder. The metal sank in. A shriek tore from the walker's throat as fractures of ice spread across its torso. But it wouldn't die, not yet. It raked its frozen sword across Sandor's side. Agony flared as the cold seared him, blood staining his cloak. He let out a snarl, driving his sword in deeper. The walker shattered, shards scattering. He collapsed to one knee, clutching his side. The wound burned with unnatural frost. Arya stumbled up, groaning, battered but alive. She helped him stand, though he towered over her. Together, they surveyed the courtyard. It was a scene from the worst nightmares, piles of corpses, living men locked in desperate struggle, fires burning out of control. The giant still thrashed, though multiple arrows and spears jutted from its flesh. Sansa was guiding a group of archers up onto a collapsed ramp for a better vantage, shooting at the giant's head. Garrick and Boren fought back-to-back, covered in blood, and Gendry was somewhere in the swirling mass. White Walker corpses occasionally littered the ground in crystalline shards. That was the only sign they were making progress. But the tide of whites remained immense. The hours stretched on, the defenders fueled by adrenaline and desperation. Eventually, the giant toppled under a barrage of flaming arrows and dragonglass spears. Its death throes shook the earth, flattening whites nearby. With the giant gone, a gap opened for men to push forward. Sandor, ignoring his searing wound, led a charge, hacking a path through the whites. Arya, Garrick, and others followed, destroying any that remained. Meanwhile, archers on the wall continued raining fire on those outside. Slowly, painfully, the living began to drive the whites from the courtyard. A white walker astride the undead stag appeared, gliding around the edges of the fight. It locked eyes with Sandor for a heartbeat. A cold, inhuman intellect shone there. Then, as if sensing the tide had turned within the walls, the walker lifted its sword. A piercing whistle sounded, and the whites, still able to move, turned away, streaming back through the shattered gate, leaving heaps of their own behind. The watchers exhaled in stunned disbelief. Had they repelled the assault? Men sank to their knees, some sobbing in relief or from pain. Sansa clutched Arya in an embrace, both trembling. Garrick slumped, leaning on his sword. The courtyard was a charnel house of limbs and ash. The survivors looked around, trying to account for their friends or to see if the horde would return. But the White Walker on the stag galloped away into the swirling snow, leading the battered remains of the undead host. Dawn was breaking. Pale light crept over the wall of ice, revealing the extent of the devastation. Castle Black stood, but barely. The gate was gone, sections of wall had collapsed, and bodies, human and otherwise, covered every inch of ground. Smoke rose from smoldering fires. Moans of wounded men echoed. A few final whites twitched, pinned under rubble, until defenders moved to dispatch them. Sandor pressed a hand to his frozen wound, teeth gritted against the pain. He saw Sansa approaching, hair matted with blood and sweat, face drawn. She reached his side, eyes wide with concern. "Your side. I'll live," he ground out, though his vision swam. The pain was unlike any normal cut, a cold that gnawed at his flesh. Did we hold?" Sansa nodded, tears in her eyes. "We did." Her voice shook. "I don't know how many are left, but we did." Arya came up, half supporting Gendry. He had a deep slash across his arm. Garrick and Boren stumbled after them, battered and bloody. Harathrios limped, but a savage grin split his face. Other men gathered, leaning on spears or each other, exhaustion etched into every line. The air was thick with the stench of death, but also with a strange sense of triumph. The White Walkers had come with a monstrous host, and the living had beaten them back. Sandor let out a ragged breath, sagging against a broken column. "Then it's done," he said. "For now." Sansa and Arya both looked around at the ruin. The cost was unspeakable, a sea of corpses and shattered walls. But the realm still had a shield. The sisters embraced, tears mingling with the grime on their cheeks. Men who could still stand began the grim work of putting the dead to rest, ensuring none would rise again. Flaming pyres were prepared. The wounded were carried to whatever shelter remained, Maester Colton and the healers racing between them. And yet, amid the slaughter, there was a resolute pride. For the third time, Sandor Clegane and his allies had faced the other's worst. For the third time, they stood victorious, albeit covered in blood and tears. No one could say if the threat was ended or if the others might gather again. But Castle Black had not fallen. The Hound still lived, battered yet unbroken, scarred face set in grim determination. The Stark sisters remained side by side, having proven their mettle. The men and women who survived would forever be changed, bound by the memory of that icy siege. In the days to come, songs would be sung of the night the wall endured again, of how the monstrous horde was turned away by a desperate, ragged army led by a scarred knight of the Watch and the fierce daughters of House Stark. Whether the final blow to the others would occur tomorrow or years hence, none could say. But for one more dawn, they had carved out hope in a land of endless winter. And Sandor Clegane, the Hound who once served cruel kings, now stood watch over a realm he had learned to protect, sword in hand, face lifted to the cold wind, unafraid. He had found his purpose in the darkest night, and so long as he drew breath, the dead would find no easy passage through the wall.